Chapter 16. The shriek resounded clearly across the city, alerting them that the battle had begun. "This city is ours, Paul's, now. Throw down your weapons and surrender." Do you really have to say that? By using low-rank Shriek of the Dead, the enemies in the entire area fall into a frenzied and fearful state. Shin Woo's booming voice echoed throughout the entire city. However, rather than throw away their weapons and surrender, their enemies that heard him rampaged about and blindly thrust their weapons at each other's heads. Obviously, whenever he utilized Shriek of the Dead, its effect would be the same, regardless of what he said. Kyahak. Kahik. When did so many undead invade the city? All knights, draw your swords. Teach those undead how heavy a sin it is to trespass on the Empire's sacred soil. Just one shout caused the city to go from peaceful looking, at least on the outside, to a complete mess. As I thought, it would be easy for a high-leveled treasure eater to wreck a city like this one if it were drawn here. Did Shin Woo rush into battle right after shouting? Of course not. The main focus of this mission was to ascertain how many high-leveled undead there were, as well as their location. He had divided the city into sections, based on how many high-leveled undead there were, and had been moving around as he calculated the effective area of his Shriek of the Dead. "I'll engrave the Empire's laws into your body. How dare you, a mere undead? You wicked black magicians. I'll make you kneel before the Emperor." Whoa, these knights here fight well. Of course, Shin Woo had predicted that there would be some who wouldn't be affected by Shriek of the Dead, but that didn't matter. Since even the level 4 skeleton knights were affected by his level 6 low-rank Shriek of the Dead. Normally, it would be difficult to achieve this good of a result with a low-rank level 6 skill, but Shin Woo's Mana Bone skill was helping. Any act that utilized magic would be buffed by Mana Bone, but it was particularly effective on abilities that changed pure magic and utilized it. Let's move quickly, before the Lord intervenes with his own golems and knights. I know already. We'll arrive at our next position shortly. They had traveled incognito around the city for upwards of 2 hours, and they had already picked the spot where he would use Shriek of the Dead. After they confirmed that the spot was safe, they immediately moved to the spot, and Shin Woo used Shriek of the Dead for a second time. Uwok. Evil puppet. You should be in hell. Why have you come outside? There weren't any skeleton knights in that area, but a huge concentration of soldiers instead. He was extremely satisfied with the chaos that spread instantly. If one were to look at the city from above, they would see hell. Good, let's go to Area C now. I'm the devil, the devil. The plan was progressing smoothly. Since the undead were fighting amongst themselves everywhere, stealth. No, Shadow Sprint was released and he was exposed to the world to see. Despite that, none came to attack Shin Woo or Jin. The low-rank Shriek of the Dead skill has become LV7. Magic has increased by 3. Nice, the skill's leveling up quickly, too. Shin Woo. I feel like they're on the move now. Okay, I'd expected that they'd start to move about now. The ones, on the move, described the undead commander's group atop the hill. Regardless of how dull he had become after transforming into an undead, he was still the Lord. Shin Woo didn't think the Lord would sit still while there was chaos spreading throughout various areas of the city. But in order to delay him as much as possible, Shin Woo had been focusing on the faraway areas in order. Obviously, it seemed as though the Lord had decided to intervene before they could finish up. Immediately after hearing Jin's report, Shin Woo heard a screeching sound from afar. The iron golems were moving. What should I do? Will my acid mist be able to melt them? Shin Woo briefly pondered on the subject and shook his head. Even if he focused all of Melting Bone Double Axe's power in one place and exploded it, he wasn't confident that he could defeat an iron golem in that way. That's because each and every one of those iron golems were elites. There are 4 of them, and the one controlling them is a level 5 elite skeleton commander. There are 3 level 5 elite skeleton elder knights guarding him, as well as 12 level 4 skeleton knights. Imposing monsters were guarding the Lord, proving that he was the Lord for anyone who didn't already know. Rather than fighting them straight up, calling upon the group that was on standby would be cleaner and safer. It probably would be, but it's also worth a try. Weren't you the one that said we'd be giving up on fighting the Lord? You're still out of it, aren't you? Jin scolded him and was about to move to the next area. Since their original plan was to go to as many spots as possible before the Lord earnestly decided to intervene, use his Shriek of the Dead to cut down the number of knights and soldiers, as well as evade the blindly rampaging swords and arrows, and then get back outside. There were more than 10,000 level 2 or higher undead within the city, so it would be foolish to fight them one at a time. Shin Woo, who'd said that himself, was for some reason patiently looking towards the direction of the Lord's troops. Jin, there are times when a person needs to take a risk. Even though Jin knew that Shin Woo's heart was set, he retorted in a weak voice. You're a skeleton, though. For me, that time is now. God. For some reason, he knew that he would take that risk. He couldn't just let an opportunity like this slip away. He couldn't help but want to fight against a higher-leveled enemy, an elite one at that. Maybe this was proof of being Shin Woo. But even so, Jin thought that Shin Woo's symptoms were a bit more severe than usual, as he was willing to face off against that assorted gift set of level 5s. Jin quietly asked, You just don't want that girl to steal your experience, right? Yep. He was way too honest. Shin Woo belatedly added, And if I fight against the skeleton using the core to control the golems and experience it firsthand, I may be able to get a feel for changing my mana into that of a golem's. Shin Woo then de-equipped his lower body armor. At the same time, he summoned the Drake Horn Lance. The appearance of that imposing weapon screamed that they were right here, as if it were an electric signboard advertisement. The mana within, as well as the high rank of the weapon, drew the attention of even the rampaging undead. He learned how to wield the weapon through the memories of the knights he'd absorbed until now, as well as Bursting Thunder, which encompassed all weapon arts. He grabbed the lance in his left hand, firmly positioning it between his arm and armpit. He called this method Couched Lance, and though he would have to abandon the lance upon collision, it wasn't much of a problem for him since he could just make another one. Let me get a bit used to it first. Kill me now. It's on you if you die. That's my partner. Ultimately, Jin made his decision, instantaneously changed directions and ran. Indeed, he plowed through the center of the city with a speed akin to lightning. There were some in the middle who blocked them, but they soon disappeared. He didn't even have to dirty his Drake Horn Lance with their bone powder as Jin broke through them with his steel-covered body. The sharper and sturdier Jin's body, the less things would interfere with his running. And because of that, he could run even faster than before. Jin wasn't a skeleton horse right now, but rather seemed like a longer and sharper lance than the Drake Horn Lance. It was a good idea to learn steel body, since I love running without anything in my way. Faster. The fastest in the world. Jin truly began to run faster and faster. In the span of time it took to a blink a few times, they had reached the center of the city from the outskirts. They had already come close enough that they could see the Lord's group on the move. The Drake Horn Lance is increasing the effectiveness of all charge-related skills by 40%. The faster Jin ran, the more red light the Drake Horn Lance emitted. Its splendid option of increasing the effectiveness of all charge-related skills by as much as 40% would catalyze the mana within and appear. Shin Woo more firmly grasped the spear and his goblin fire blazed. I definitely have to take care of at least one of them with this. When he factored in his stats that had surpassed a level 4's and neared a level 5's, Jin's destructive power through his speed, and the Drake Horn Lance, which would boost all of that to its maximum while possessing its own destructive power, it would be unlikely that even a level 5 elite monster would survive an attack. No, they had to die. Because if they didn't kill their opponent, they would have to cope with the force following the moment of impact in its entirety. In any case, their charge attack had to kill one of them. You see the biggest golem in the centermost area, right? I'm going for him. All right. He stuck to Jin's back as much as he could and maximized their connection. At this point, they didn't really have to say things out loud. Whatever he thought of was naturally transmitted to Jin, and Shin Woo could roughly figure out what Jin wanted as well. From the start, one of the reasons that Kratia had been interested in them was because of the assimilation phenomenon that occurred through their perfect connection, a connection so perfect that it was almost strange. Though she didn't know much about the skill itself, she did say that other horseback riding skills didn't develop the way theirs did. And that was being proven right now. It wasn't just a simple connection between a man and a horse. It was something only possible between them because they were both undead heroes and the connection was beginning to bear fruit. The low-rank horseback riding skill has become LV10 and evolves into the intermediate level. You have formed a truly deep connection with your riding companion and gone past the union between man and horse. Attuning your will with your companion and adding their strength to your own is no longer a skill but can be considered to be in the realm of magic. You have learned the intermediate assimilation skill. Agility and magic has increased by 10. Shin Woo felt it when he gained the skill. The moment he used the two skills that had evolved in this battle, Shadow Sprint and Assimilation, to their very limit, he realized that he and Jin could reach unknown territory. Shin Woo, soon. I know. He'd only just acquired the skill, but the assimilation skill's ability was clear. Before Jin had even transmitted his intent, he could figure out what Jin wanted. The two had already gotten really close to the Lord's group. Obviously, their enemies noticed them too. However, they didn't worry about that. Since at this very moment, there was no one here who could respond to their speed. Hostility detect. Shin Woo and Jin frontally crashed into the golem they had decided upon beforehand, and at that moment, they matched their breathing. Within their minds, they drew a clear picture. The world ground to a halt, as if they had pressed a temporary pause button on Jin's overwhelming speed. Jin's speed in its entirety was contained within the lance, and the lance would break through the golem. That image! You worry up. Shin Woo yelled a strange battle cry and raised the mana throughout his entire body. He gripped the spear, and the instinctually applied mana, containing the power of bursting thunder, rushed towards the end of the spear. The deep blue mana was added to the red energy and the two mixed together, forming swaying violet sparks. The low-rank bursting thunder skill has become LV10 and evolves into the intermediate level. Strength and magic has increased by 10. Low-rank power slash is absorbed. It has become possible for you to incorporate lightning into your weapon. As per the saying, even when it's rotten, it's still a herring. The iron golem realized that Shin Woo attacked before he did, and twisted its body around in an attempt to somehow reduce the damage it would sustain. At the same time, it also deformed its body in an attempt to attack them as well, so they could safely say that it was a truly impressive response. However, to Jin, no, to both him and Shin Woo, who he was assimilating with, it looked much too slow. They had already seen that in their image and were able to overcome it. Critical hit. Hyruak Bedakaru. 1. The moment the extended lance struck its target in one area, the golem emitted a sound that he couldn't understand at all. And then, the golem broke apart and its pieces flew everywhere. You achieved the feat of executing a higher-leveled, elite foe. Strength has increased by 10. Skill proficiency in bursting thunder has increased. Shin Woo watched as the iron golem scattered into pieces in front of him, or at least, where it was, and couldn't even react. That's because the recoil at the moment of impact was too much for them to handle. At the very least, the lance broke apart at the moment of impact, so the recoil was dispersed as much as possible. If it hadn't, Shin Woo's arm bone or Jin's leg bone would have broke. It was definitely an absurdly powerful technique, but without coming up with a proper countermeasure, it was unusable. Who are you? If you're a knight of the Empire, how dare you not recognize me? There's no way you'd fail to recognize who I am and do something so wicked. It seemed as though it couldn't help but be shaken after watching one of its most powerful forces get destroyed so quickly, as the skeleton commander yelled in a quivering voice. As expected, it possessed a clear ego, perhaps due to being level 5, but it inevitably couldn't remember its own name. When Shin Woo became aware of that, he instinctively yelled. Do you really not know why I'm here? I don't know. There was no way it'd know. If there were some special reason, Shin Woo would like to know himself. He just spoke whatever came to mind and circulated his mana to help him and Jin cope with the accumulated shock. Surprisingly, Mana Bone, which circulated the mana, could be applied to Jin through the assimilation skill. It truly was a cheat skill. However, he was slyly lying to the skeleton commander even while being astonished by how far his skill had developed. Bah! There should be a reason you can think of. We're not dispatched just anywhere. Dispatched. Were you perhaps sent by the imperial family? Look here. Stop attacking for now. Stand by. I said to stand by. Huh? He'd just haphazardly said that to buy time for them to heal, but their reaction was much better than he'd expected. While the Lord was flustered, Shin Woo collected the loot with a relaxed posture without giving anything away and even approached the Lord, dragging Jin with him. The golems acted like obedient hunting dogs, and when they heard the words, "Stand by," they immediately stepped back. On the other hand, the knights looked uneasy and were unable to easily approach. You have acquired 17,500 perium. You have acquired a deteriorated original bone core. Oh. As expected, the drops changed at around level 5. He felt as though they were being way too stingy with the perium for an elite level 5 monster, and despite the original core being deteriorated, it was still an original core. He was extremely satisfied and raised his head. Shin Woo saw the Lord's hand not leaving the core, even while flustered, and was impressed. He then decided to put out a feeler. So are you going to talk now? I haven't done anything wrong. They offered it to me first. I wanted to leave the underground. Hearing the Lord's unexpected response, Shin Woo was momentarily speechless. What the hell is this senile skeleton even saying? They offered it to me first? He wanted to leave the underground? This wasn't just some common corruption from a noble, but something a lot bigger. Still, that doesn't lessen your crimes. Shin Woo strived to not let the confusion show on his face, and had to try really hard to adapt to what the Lord was saying. Just because a skeleton's face didn't change didn't mean that there was nothing else to do. He had to prevent himself from being quiet for too long, or speak with a flustered tone, or even control the pattern by which his goblin fire swayed. If he interrogated him for a bit longer, it seemed like he'd be able to learn something new. Perhaps it would be about the relationship between the underground empire and above ground. You're not, huh? However, despite Shin Woo acting with his entire body, the skeleton commander had somehow figured him out. Yeah. If you were the Golden Shadow, then you wouldn't have destroyed a golem. You're not. You aren't. Who the hell are you? Shit. He didn't know where he'd gone wrong, but it was pointless to continue acting after he was caught. Before the Lord, who had figured him out, could retreat, he quickly stretched out his hand and stole the Lord's core. It was only possible because the Lord's close combat abilities seemed fairly low. Die. We won't let you touch the Lord. TCH. The moment he'd reached out his hand, the Elder Knights came at him from both sides. Fortunately, because Jin acted quickly and retreated, Shin Woo wasn't cut by their swords filled with tumultuous death energy. What the hell were you thinking? You idiot. Sorry. I went overboard thinking that I'd found some kind of hidden quest or something. Catch him. Take the core back. The Lord, or rather the skeleton commander, shrieked, and the 3 level 5 elite skeleton elder knights, as well as the 12 level 4 skeleton knights charged at Shin Woo all at once. At that moment, a bizarre black light surged from the skeleton commander and was absorbed by the knights. Shin Woo could see that their mana was being amplified. It was a special command-type skill. The Lord has given us his command. I'll bury my sword in his heart. How dare you put your filthy hands on one of the Lord's possessions? TCH. The skeleton knights attacked quickly, as if the Lord had increased their strength by 50%, and made it so that Shin Woo and Jin were busy running away. If Shin Woo were alone, he would have just given up an arm to the oncoming swords in all directions. How is it that we can't take down that one guy? Why can't we hit him when he's right in front of us? Connection with Commander has been lost. Standing by. However, the golems didn't respond to the commander's shrieks. He was certain that the Lord couldn't issue commands without the core. Shin Woo decided that that's where his hopes lie. What do we do? Do we run first? No. We're ending it here. If that bastard goes outside and starts getting set up, we're screwed. Ah, damn it. Even while matching their breathing and dodging the incoming swords tinged with death energy by hectically moving their bodies around, Shin Woo yelled confidently. At the same time, he concentrated on the core that he'd swiped from the Lord. Of course, the core had transformed into bone the moment he'd stolen it from the Lord, but grasping the original flow of mana within wasn't difficult. Limited Order Bone Core. With your superb analytical skills and knowledge, you recognized that this is a transformed original core. The original core records a person's mana, and when that mana is injected into the core, it is changed to a particular frequency, enabling you to order the registered entities I0918, I0919, I0920, I0921. In the process of changing into bone, the original commander's registration has been erased. It is unknown whether the core will activate normally. In other words, the core registered the Lord's mana and locked it so that only he could use it, and it also possesses a lock that enables him to control all of the golems here. Fortunately, one of those locks have been released, and the only ones who could tamper with that setup were level 7 golems like Guillotine Steelworker. Shin Woo suddenly thought the system of manufacturing golems in the Empire was messed up. So how tough would it be to control all of the golems without a core? While being vaguely frightened of doing so, at the same time, he couldn't help but feel happiness welling in a corner of his heart. I came here for a change of pace to take my mind off of the administrative seal, yet I found a crucial part here. I hadn't believed in it before, but I guess fate does exist. With Jin's help, Shin Woo was able to avoid the Skeleton Knight's attacks and while moving extensively, infused his mana into the Limited Order Bone Core. Of course, it didn't go so well at first, and after repeatedly trying to activate it as its previous registration hadn't been erased, it seemed as though he had finally satisfied some sort of condition as the bone core began to radiate light. At that moment, recognizing new commander, receiving orders, the golems hadn't been a part of the unfolding chaos and were on standby in a separate location, yet they suddenly spoke. Shin Woo suddenly clenched his fist since it had gone as he'd planned, but the Lord, the skeleton commander, was extremely taken aback. How can you use the core when you haven't gotten their permission? You're worse than the Golden Shadow. As I thought, since you're an undead, you've lost a lot of your common sense. UMHP. Whether he could properly use the core or not would decide the outcome of the battle. Shin Woo was well aware of that, so focused on the core. It seemed as though the skeleton commander had likewise realized that fact. You have to kill him quickly and take back the core. The Lord has commanded us. Bring some of the soldiers over here. Where are the soldiers? Damn. If I had my horse, I would have to suffer so much from that skeleton horse. The things the Skeleton Knights were saying were becoming laughable. Shin Woo continued to infuse mana into the core and fixed everything that came from the transformed original core into his mind. Yeah, that's right. The answer's inside here. If I study this, I'll get the basic idea. The way to control the golems without a core, as well as how to create them with mana. Shin Woo's realized that his intent and how much mana he infused would determine what part of the core reacted, as well as how it would change the mana. He also realized how that transformed mana would be transmitted to the golems, as well as how the golems would move through that transmission. It would normally take a few months before he was proficient, but to him, who'd already acquired a general administrator's seal, this kind of mechanism was easy for him. He could control them as easily as if he were moving his own body. No, it was actually more simple to do than that. As a result, eliminating enemy. Result of searching for mana. There are reinforcement troops in the back. Executing them first. This is. Instantaneously, the 3 iron golems became the skeleton's enemies, and the skeleton commander was mixed with both feelings of anger and panic, so he didn't know what to do. The skeleton commander raised his hand, as if he were preparing an offensive spell, but he then lowered his hand since he didn't want to damage the golems. He was definitely thinking of killing the trespassers as quickly as possible and retaking the core. Protect the Lord. But we have to kill the trespassers. The Lord takes priority. You guys take care of him. I understand. You guys, why you can't destroy the golems? While the commander was hesitating, the Elder Knights hurriedly took on one of the iron golems each, and the level 4 skeleton knights continued to fight against Shin Woo. What a turn of events! I was waiting for that. Shin Woo acted as if he'd been waiting for that very moment, wielding the lightning tooth in one hand and the core in the other, sweeping through the skeletons. It was a superb showing of multitasking. Kuok! Kihek! My lord! Regardless of how much stronger they'd become from the commander's skill, most of Shin Woo's main skills had grown to the intermediate level, and was a monster close to level 5. The lightning tooth is strengthening bursting thunder. Your lightning becomes stronger. As bursting thunder reached the intermediate level, the lightning tooth could finally show its true strength. Blue lightning streaked across the lightning tooth and spewed out onto his enemies, suppressing them. Whenever he struck with his sword, which they couldn't even see, the skeleton's skulls and ribs would break to pieces, scattering everywhere. It's quite simple. How is this possible? The 3 iron golems and elder knights were fighting against each other as all of the level 4 skeleton knights had instantly been annihilated. There was no one left to protect the Lord. This had all happened within the span of 5 minutes after he'd swiped the core that controlled the golems from the Lord. The Lord couldn't believe this at all. Listen up. It's fine if you destroy the golems. We have to stop that atrocious cheater. My lord. When the Lord realized that Shin Woo didn't really care if the stolen golems were damaged or not, he urgently called out to the skeleton elder knights, but it was already too late. From the start, Shin Woo had desperately sought to steal the iron golems as they were solid, tough and powerful elites. Even if they were indeed strengthened skeleton elder knights, they weren't able to take on an iron golem one-on-one. What's worse, they had been ordered to not damage the golems, so the elder knights were put on the defensive and couldn't move an inch. Damn it! Where are the other soldiers and knights? Where the hell did they go? You'll be able to meet them soon. Shin Woo controlled the golems and hectically drove the elder knights into a corner. Shin Woo simultaneously steered Jin and instantly came within distance of the commander. At that moment, the commander's jawbone clattered and chanted something, causing mana to collect in the air. He was trying to cast a spell. However, shock missile. I heard that commanders double as magicians as well. I also heard that they're jam-packed with magic, but they don't have any internal stability. The spear he'd created with mana was easily split apart by the blue sparks rising from the lightning tooth. If he took it straight up, it might have hurt, but that's it. That's because he wasn't a magician specialized in magic, but completely specialized in commanding only. Seeing that, the skeleton commander babbled that he was wielding a treasure unfitting of a thief and so on and so forth, but Shin Woo obviously didn't concern himself with that. Single lightning. No. A single strand of blue lightning from the air shot down onto him. This technique was both the alpha and the omega of bursting thunder. Following the lightning strike, he would quickly slash with his sword. As bursting thunder reached the intermediate level, its true potential was unlocked. This sword strike may be an extremely basic technique, but it was as imposing as divine punishment. Hup! He might have had some trick left up his sleeve as Shin Woo felt like he heard him clattering, but Shin Woo just intensified the mana and thus the lightning. Ultimately, the skeleton commander screamed awfully and disappeared. He had been completely destroyed, as if a gust of wind had passed by. The skeleton commander's floating skull blazed with goblin fire as if cursing him, but soon was consumed by the flames and vanished. You have achieved the feat of defeating a higher-leveled enemy. All stats have increased by 1. The lightning tooth burned the air, emitting an intense ozone smell. It was pointless to ask at this point, but how could he smell again? Shin Woo thought trivially and withdrew his sword. We have to take care of the others quickly. How dare you kill the Lord? A little while later, a fine, but certainly recognizable flaming pattern could be seen from above the city. The Pauls and Kratia, who seemed to have just been waiting for his signal, immediately entered the city, and were soon able to see it. The city, which Shin Woo had turned into a scene more horrific than any hell. Kill him. Kill them all. For the Empire. You said you'd just kill the Lord, but what is this? Kratia completely froze the wall, ascended to the top, and just stood dumbstruck after confirming the massacre. The skeletons were hostile to everything and everyone. It started from the level 4 skeleton knights to the ordinary level 1 commoners. All of them had equally fallen into madness. At this very moment, she heard a jarring, hair-raising scream from somewhere, but Kratia thought that it was a voice she'd heard somewhere before. Do the undead periodically fall into madness? No, there's no way that something could happen so suddenly. Then was it Shin Woo? But how? The captains ordered us to annihilate them. Let us put to rest those foolish and pitiful fools of the Empire. Follow the commander. Though Kratia stood petrified, the Pauls followed behind her into the city, and unhesitatingly rushed forward. The elite squadron, led by the reborn Paul 41, the level 4 Doom Factor, didn't have even a shred of hesitation and cut apart all of the surrounding undead. They had already finished stealing themselves. What could he have done to these guys? How? Kratia couldn't get over her doubt at all, but it felt like a waste of time to do so while just sitting there. Ultimately, she stopped mulling over trivial thoughts and went straight into a large-scale spell. After seeing Shin Woo's use of mana, she'd developed a new technique. She'd made up her mind to test her catalyzed magic. A large quantity of mana stuck to the ice artifact that floated before her. Kratia watched as a large amount of mana grew, and smiled. The low-rank shriek of the dead skill has become LV8. Magic has increased by 2. Your skills are affected by your mana and can persist for a longer period of time. Whoa, what's that? Meanwhile, Shin Woo had finished cleaning up the area, and was using Shriek of the Dead in various areas of the city. He gaped once he saw the spell Kratia had cast. There was no way an occupant of the city wouldn't be able to see the spell. There was an absurdly large mass of ice floating in the air. Ooh, it's cold just looking at it. The cold's not the issue here. The clump of ice floating within the air created a suction force that drew in the surrounding mana. This mana seemed to rotate around the ice and then transformed into sharp ice spears. And those ice spears poured down upon the enemies everywhere. He could describe the clump of ice that so slowly advanced into the air, as well as the following ice spears that poured onto the battlefield as horrific. To the point that Shin Woo thought that he didn't even need to separately take out the skeleton commander if she could use something like that to attack the entire city. What kind of huge spell is that? Are all level 6s like that? No way. But when he considered the fact that Kratia hadn't been in the Empire for very long and was still a newbie hero, he was just speechless. Shin Woo hadn't expected to influence her to the point of completing such a grand magic. He decided to be even more guarded against the other heroes from now on. Of course, there was nothing wrong with being careful. He then realized that he hadn't been aware of how amazing he was. If you get hit by that, would you die, Shin Woo? Yep. Fortunately, it seems avoidable, but no. It doesn't seem like we'll be enemies with Kratia, so we don't need to go into hypotheticals here. 1 week was more than enough time to figure out each other's tendencies. Kratia was only single-mindedly focused on magic, but was also a rational thinker, as well as loyal. He thought she was a trustworthy human. I don't think I'll have to make a move with that there. Let's rest. As soon as Shin Woo decided that the battle was over, he immediately sank down onto the ground. He grasped the limited order bone core in his hand. It was the key that would control the iron golems that stood before them. They had some spare time now, so he decided to earnestly start studying the core. That's what you call resting. We should be able to get to level 5 if we use all of the bones we've acquired from the battle. So, I want to finish the quest before I level up. You're so stubborn it's scary. Shin Woo could already use the bone core much better than the original owner, the Lord, could. Considering the fact that he had controlled 3 iron golems simultaneously and made it so that 2 of the Elder Knights couldn't move an inch, while wielding the lightning tooth in his other hand and swinging it at the final Elder Knight. Jin was just shocked. However, Shin Woo wasn't satisfied with just that. Arama Steelworker. No, the Empire made a huge mistake. If you hold the remote control, it becomes really obvious how the golem's mana is created, as well as how they move, doesn't it? If anyone could tell that from just analyzing it, they wouldn't have made a remote control like that. Regardless of how deep one's magical knowledge was, or how much they analyzed the basics behind it, they wouldn't be able to copy the mana. At least, if they followed what Krasia had told them. However, Shin Woo was gripping the bone core and struggling against it, so he didn't hear what Jin was saying. That's right. Originally, mana doesn't have its own form. The form changes depending on who is using it. In some ways, it might be similar to my karma. Shin Woo closely examined the process that changed his mana within the core, and was repeatedly in awe. It felt like he had tested and confirmed the knowledge he'd memorized until now, and was deeply moved. He also felt a sense of stubbornness, that he wanted to do what the core did all by himself. Then let's do it in order. It's surprising that you're doing this in order. However, it was impossible right now. For starters, Shin Woo focused on giving out detailed commands to the golems. There were basic commands recorded in the core, but he wanted to personally inject his will into the golems based on the strange mana pattern change. This wasn't very difficult, as he had already received all the knowledge from the original core. Following order. Running in place. Following order. Sparring with I-0921. He had succeeded, so next up was to transmit the image in his head in its entirety to the golems. The core had just become a medium that changed Shin Woo's mana into that of a golem's. He had already completely analyzed the core and successfully produced their effects. He was even soon able to release the limited clause on his administrative authority. In other words, he would be able to control golems below level 5, even if they weren't registered in the core. This was already a shocking achievement, but he wasn't satisfied with that. Executing push-ups. Executing 8 personal training exercises. I'm almost there. Shin Woo gently closed his eyes. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was the one who knew about a golem's mana most, aside from a golem itself. He just needed to take one more step. He trusted in mana's ability to change. He had absorbed a golem's mana before, so he thought that there was no reason he wouldn't be able to change his mana to that of a golem's. Shin Woo was now able to genuinely think that way. Shin Woo fell into deep thought, and he dropped the core that had been in his hand, which automatically entered his inventory. If he truly wanted to produce a golem's mana, he had to discard the core. 1. Standing by. Connection with Commander has been lost. The golems, which had been diligently doing their push-ups and 8 PT exercises, returned to standby. It was possible because they weren't the autonomous defense-type golems, which automatically recognized their enemies and attacked. A golem's mana. A golem's mana. How long had he stood there? Around the time where he became unaware of the chaos and the terror that covered the city, mana suddenly appeared on his fingertips. It seemed as though the mana couldn't make up its mind, as it hovered around, but it soon changed into flames, acid, and lightning. The mana went from a living person's to a dead person's. Then it changed to Shin Woo's mana, to something else's, and ultimately arrived at unknown territory. He realized that all of it was similar and that there wasn't any real reason to classify them. The moment he thought that way, the mana within him seethed. The mana bone skill responded to his realization and more purely refined his mana. Though there wasn't any change in the volume of mana, this had caused his mana to be reborn. The element category has been opened in the status menu. You can draw the pure essence of the elements from your mana and use them as you please. The low-rank Flames of Revenge and the intermediate Acid Poison Spray skills are eliminated. You have acquired low-rank Fire LV4, intermediate Acid LV3, and intermediate Lightning LV1. The Flames of Revenge, as well as the Acid Poison Spray skills, were nothing more than skills that changed mana for a special purpose and allowed one to manipulate the transformed mana. Compared to fundamentally changing mana into a pure element, the skills were inferior techniques. He had become able to freely change his mana into an element and use it, whether he wanted to cause it to spread and persistently blaze, or shoot out in a straight line. Shin Woo then realized that there was no reason to confine flames or acid into one form. Yeah, that's what Kracia realized as well when she watched me. The purpose of bone reinforcement wasn't for him to learn typical skills from absorbing the memories of countless individuals, as well as their abilities, but to make him realize that he could combine countless abilities into one, or divide one into countless others. The black mana above the palm of his hand unraveled like a ball of yarn and formed a single pattern. If the steelworkers had seen that, they would have been shocked. That's because it was the high-rank administrative seal that was only allowed to level 7 golems. This was the result of Guillotine Steelworker's arrogance. He thought that only golems could create the seal, so he didn't even feel the need to hide the pattern. Recognizing high-rank authority. It's a pleasure. Obeying Steelworker's orders. Output limitations have been completely released. High-rank commander is cleared. The 3 golems quickly stood up. If they had treated his commands as though they were from a lieutenant until now they were treating him as though he were a 2-star general and were showing their loyalty. Accepting Iron Golems I0919, I0920, and I0921 as subordinates. These golems are under the effect of the command skill and are strengthened. Jin, who had watched with bated breath ever since Shin Woo had created several elements, realized that Shin Woo had really done it and was shocked. At that moment, Shin Woo saw a message right in front of him stating that Kracia was finished. Quest complete. You have acquired 3 permits to God's secret shop. The acting skill has become LV11. You have learned the Joker's innate skill, Disguise. Disguise LV1, active. A true Joker fools even himself. And if he perfectly fools even himself, then he can ultimately fool the entire world. You can transform into someone you are completely familiar with, or modify a part of your body or an item you are holding. Of course, it only changes the outside appearance, so please use this skill with discretion. Shin Woo felt as if he had goosebumps all over his body. How could this kind of skill exist? He could understand if it were a skill that allowed him to create something with mana, but this wasn't like that. Fool yourself, so you can fool the world? It sounded way too grandiose. Even he, the possessor of the skill, couldn't understand the principles behind the skill. He had finally finished his homework, yet it felt like he had gotten another more difficult piece of homework. What's wrong, Shin Woo? Were you not able to make the seal just like you wanted? No, that's not it. Shin Woo just shook his head towards Jin, who was worrying about him. He had thought that everything would be his for the taking after figuring out how to make the seal, but was crestfallen when he realized that wasn't true, and wasn't able to honestly relay that fact. At that moment, Shin Woo suddenly felt the death energy around him dwindle. Now that he thought about it, he didn't hear any screams or battle cries in the surrounding area anymore. That meant only one thing. You and your comrades have cleared away the death in the city, Kahabi. Though you did not eliminate the curse, you managed to lessen the energy of death here, so no more undead will appear in this area. It was message saying that they'd purified the city. You have acquired 2 permits to God's secret shop. You have acquired 10,000 perium. Proficiency in combat-related skills has increased. You can now use your own private chatting channel. If heroes clear out a city of the undead, they receive a reward personally bestowed by God. He'd seen everything else before, but the private chatting channel was a surprise. Of course, it was questionable how much he would use it in the future. If a hero performs exceptionally in the task known as purification, they may be awarded a hero token. However, Shin Woo had already obtained the Joker karma, so he couldn't obtain it a second time. No, perhaps the purification process was much too wicked, such that he wouldn't have been able to attain it, even if he didn't possess the Joker karma. You have gathered more than 10 permits to God's secret shop. You may exchange 10 permits to God's secret shop for 1 permit to God's garden. However, there was an additional message that appeared before him. It was the first time he'd seen a message like this. Shin Woo stared vacantly at the message for some time, and then silently opened the chatting channel. He had decided that this was something that he should know about beforehand. Mr. Shin Woo has entered. Yi Jin Jin, I'm glad you're safe. Shin Woo, I'm glad you're safe as well. Seniors, have any of you gone into God's garden before? Prince Altania, you crazy bastard. How the hell did you collect 10 permits to God's secret shop? Yi Jin Jin, you shouldn't talk like that. That makes it sound like Mr. Shin Woo is crazy. Lloyd HK, he is crazy. How did you collect 10 of them already? As expected, it seemed as though his seniors knew about it. If it was something they hadn't heard about before, he wouldn't have gotten any information out of them. Instead, they would have pestered him like crazy, and it would have been a real pain in the ass. It was a relief that that wasn't the case. He quickly asked them a question. Shin Woo, I was just lucky enough to get them. What should I do with them? Yasunori Akira, a small blessing. That's what we call it. Even I haven't gotten one before. Ethan Cruz, God's garden is a kind of temple. Though it's a bit pricey to get in, God will personally bestow upon you her divine grace, which is well worth the cost. Lloyd HK. We've heard about it from Ethan, but we've never actually gone there before. Since we need to continuously go into the secret shop, we couldn't just continue gathering them. Arian Ruparte. Shin Woo, I'm envious of your talent and passion. I thought you were out of the ordinary ever since you rescued Jin Jin, but... Shin Woo, it was all because of her. You see, I received a lot of permits for God's secret shop from saving her. Prince Altania. Maybe I should do some manual labor too. At this rate, I'm afraid I'll fall behind a newbie. That would be such a disgrace. He wanted to say, you might have already fallen behind Kraisha already, but Shin Woo barely kept himself from saying it. And his senior's advice continued on. Sarah von Rededane. We have to periodically go to the secret shop since we can't just fill our inventories with food. Shin Woo, you're probably well aware of this, but you cannot afford to be too greedy. Please enter God's garden only after you have enough permits to spare or after you have acquired a quest that's easy to complete. Shin Woo. Thank you, senior. I'll keep that in mind. Prince Altania. As I thought, Sarah's been to God's garden before. It's really clear advice. Sarah von Rededane. Please call me Rededane. In any case, Shin Woo didn't need to eat, so essentially, it would only be beneficial for him to go to God's garden. He thanked and said goodbye to his seniors who always gave him good advice, and left the chatting channel. But then, Ethan Cruz, I have high expectations of you, Shin Woo. Perhaps we'll meet soon. Shin Woo, I'll work hard. Lloyd HK. For Ethan to say something like that. Prince Altania. Senior, you can't say stuff like that. I'm close to level 7, you know? Once I get to level 7, I'll go through all the dungeons I know about, and get to level 8 in a flash. Lloyd. If you ask me sincerely, I can help you out. Ethan Cruz. Prince, you're extremely talented as well. I just didn't say it since it seemed so obvious, you rascal. Shin Woo stepped away from the exchange of well wishes between seniors and juniors and left the chatting channel. But unexpectedly, at that moment, he saw 2 messages appear simultaneously. Mr. Ethan Cruz is requesting a private chat. Ms. Yi Jin Jin is requesting a private chat. Was this message appearing because he'd unlocked the private chatting channel function? Shin Woo accepted Ethan's request first. In no time, he heard Ethan's voice in his ear. It wasn't lip service. Shin Woo, you'll become a big shot in no time. Thank you. It's important to know just how much you're worth. I hope I didn't see wrong. It's nice to be humble, but remember that you can't afford to fool yourself. Be aware of how special you are and proceed steadily. Why was this guy saying such burdensome things? He should have just refused, just like Arema Steelworker had done with the golems, but Ethan eventually went on to the main topic. I'm a high level right now, so I don't really need them, but there are a few dungeons that only I know about. Pardon me. Even an idiot would understand what Ethan Cruz was saying. However, that made him all the more suspicious of him. Did you want to tell me about these dungeons? Exactly. Obviously, the higher level the dungeon, the more difficult it is to find. These dungeons are hidden in more unusual places and trick adventurers. That's why heroes go crazy whenever they find a dungeon. However, he knows about a few dungeons? And was only going to tell Shin Woo about them? There are other heroes, so are you really okay with telling me? Ah, Shin Woo. I just told you, didn't I? I told you that you'd become big. You'll be different from useless bums like the prince. I see. I'm glad you're quick on the uptake. Now then, I'll activate the minimap sharing function. Sharing the minimap. This feature would share one's location with another person. Apparently, it was the feature that was unlocked following the private chat function, so it felt strange to Ethan Cruz that Shin Woo hadn't unlocked it yet. It feels like the image has been stuck into my head. You roughly know what direction you need to go in, right? Yes, thank you. It felt similar to opening the world map in a game, marking one's destination, and moving towards said destination. To put it simply, a navigation system for a car. If he closed his eyes, an arrow would appear in his head that would indicate which direction he should go in. All of the dungeons Ethan had told him about were situated in the same area. They were quite far off, but if he used the train, he could get there quickly, and even if he didn't have access to the train, he could get there riding Jin at top speed in only 3 weeks. If he just walked there, he could get there in a year. I hope you grow quickly. Since you can't invade the capital all by yourself. Thank you, very much. I hope I'll be able to stand side by side with you one day. Superb. That ended their private chat. Immediately after, Shin Woo stopped acting and thought about it. What the hell is this piece of shit planning? Are there heroes who kill other heroes to grow? Then does God just sit by and allow that to happen? What are you talking about? There's an asshole, one of our seniors who's trying to lead me somewhere. 100%. He knew since he was in the same line of business, swindler. Ethan Cruz was 100% a son of a bitch. But compared to Shin Woo, Ethan's means were quite sloppy. For example, all of the dungeons he'd informed him about were in the same direction. A prominent figure like Ethan Cruz. No, a hero who's been at this for a long time wouldn't have just stayed in one place like that. So does it make any sense that all of the dungeons he'd told him about were in the same place? It was definitely a trick clearly aimed to lead Shin Woo to a special area. Couldn't it just be that he found a ton of dungeons that weren't fit for his level after leveling up a lot and moved to another area? It's not good to be so distrustful of people, Shin Woo. No, my S.O.B. radar is going crazy right now. I thought it was strange that I became a rising star or whatever just by introducing myself in the chatting channel. But you are a rising star. Even from my point of view, you're so talented that it's strange. You know pretty much everything about me, but the problem is that the other heroes don't. Ethan Cruz's objective was so clear, but he didn't know what his motive was. What good was it to kill another hero? Rather, he should get a penalty from God, so why? I guess I could just meet with God and ask her myself. Shin Woo thought, and around the time he felt relaxed, he got another private chat request. Of course, it came from Jin. As soon as he accepted, he heard a lively girl's voice in his ear. Jin, I'm sorry if I'm disturbing you. But I have something that I really needed to tell you. It's because I got another private chat request. Jin. Who? Is it Ms. Redidane? It shouldn't be Arian, too. Ethan Cruz. Jin. That senior. Ah, that's right. I recently unlocked a new function. I'm here right now. Here. He waited, figuring that she might have unlocked the sharing function, and as he expected, the minimap sharing function activated. Of course, he couldn't refuse, but didn't. Funnily enough, she was in the complete opposite direction to the point Ethan Cruz had marked. Jin. I'll work hard to catch up to your level. so let's hunt together in a party later. Yeah, sure. Yi Jin Jin, then I'll get going now. I'll get back to hunting. Shin Woo listened to the cheerful Yi Jin Jin until the very end and couldn't help but suddenly recall what his seniors had told him. Take it easy on the romance. There's no smoke without fire, but perhaps, no way. If one likes a skeleton, then they were either really screwed up in the head, or became a skeleton themselves. Now that he thought about it, both of them were pretty much the same. Shin Woo unhesitatingly interpreted Yi Jin Jin's feelings for him as just trust. Or perhaps respect. If it was either of those, there was nothing wrong with her. It was fine to have those kind of feelings for a skeleton. Shin Woo, what the hell did you do? Then, Kraisha came flying by and landed in front of them. Beyond her, the Pauls were moving diligently to collect the bones. Shin Woo marveled at the fact that they did it without him ordering them to do so. These guys were truly starting to show promise. I just used a skill. It doesn't work on allies, so don't worry. If you just let me see you use that skill. No, wait a sec. Kraisha was soon greeted with a sight that was much more surprising than the shriek of the dead. She had discovered the 3 iron golems that stood side by side around Shin Woo, as if guarding him. There was no way she, with her magical abilities, wouldn't be able to figure out what kind of relationship Shin Woo had with the golems. This. Perhaps? Yep. Let's increase the duration of the contract. As soon as Shin Woo nodded his head and acknowledged her, Kraisha's eyes brightened, as though there were stars in her eyes. It was the most beautiful and lively face he'd seen since meeting her. However, Shin Woo replied sharply and firmly, like a slap to the face. Don't want to. Shin Woo, who had already achieved his objective, didn't really need to hang out with her any longer. But Kraisha, who had witnessed yet another miracle from Shin Woo, couldn't let him go so easily. Shin Woo ultimately agreed to increase their contract by just 3 more days. In exchange, all of the bones of the undead that she killed would go to him, and they forged another alliance. Shin Woo had never leveled up as planned. But this time, he was somehow able to prepare for his level up at his leisure. His accumulated stats from both his achievements and the evolution of his skills totaled 1,598. In other words, he was only 2 stats away from a level up, and there were a ton of bones here that he could use to increase his stats. Jin, what about you? I'm at 1,574. Good. You should be able to level up too. You want me to increase my stats by 26 all at once? Jin said in shock, but Shin Woo didn't listen to him. He was just reacting like that because he was so happy. Even if Jin didn't think that way himself, that's how it was. The city was extremely vast, and the amount of knights protecting it was considerable. However, due to Shin Woo, Kraisha, as well as the Pauls, not even one skeleton was missed and the city was completely cleared. Therefore, with the quantity of bones they'd gathered in one spot, they could raise their stats by more than 26, and could even go up to 50 if they wanted. Pick out the bones level 4 or higher. There were about 100 level 4 bones. Most of them were from knights, but there were occasionally some magician's bones mixed in as well. Shin Woo decided to invest those magician's bones into Jin. Aside from his agility, everything else needed work, but Jin especially lacked in the magic department. And this too. Naturally, Shin Woo held out the original bone core. He had some cores remaining after using them on the deteriorated original bone core. The cores kept adding up, and soon, he managed to make another one. Shin Woo, who had been prepared to sacrifice the limited order original bone core, felt relieved that he wouldn't have to. Jin's been avoiding this thing. Before joining together with Kraisha, they actively cleared out the golems in the outskirts of the Empire and had managed to accumulate several original bone cores. However, most of those went to Shin Woo. Not only was Jin afraid of absorbing them, but Shin Woo also thought that it was urgent he got stronger ASAP. But I really can't get any stats out of these bone cores anymore. It's better for you to absorb them, if you consider their efficiency. Damn it. Fine. The same types of bones fundamentally possess a similar karma. There was even a limit on absorbing skeletons' bones, which possessed a special characteristic based on the individual, so there was no way that golems, which were carefully thought out and produced, would be any different. Through hard work, Shin Woo had already acquired all the stats he could from the bone original cores, and now it was Jin's turn. It seemed as though Jin realized that he couldn't get out of it this time, and calmly assented. Since it wasn't his first time experiencing it, he didn't break down. Tell me when you've got it. I got it. I just need to raise my stats by 8 more. 8, huh? Okay. Yeah, it was fortunate that Jin was headstrong. Shin Woo nodded in satisfaction and continuously used the magician's bones on Jin. Whenever he did so, Jin would flinch, but he managed to bear with it quite well. He maintained his connection with Shin Woo and remembered the days he had endured, which helped him get through it. Just 3 more stats. Just 1 more level 5 bone should be enough then. Shin Woo examined the level 5 bones he'd collected from the battle. First were the 4 bones he'd gotten from the Elder Knights. There were 4, including the 3 Shin Woo had killed, as well as 1 that Kreisha had killed. There were 2 more level 5 bones as well. They were the Lord's, the Skeleton Commander's, skull and rib bone. He was lucky to have gotten them through Bone Reinforcement's new option. Which one should we go with? It doesn't really matter to me, so just pick one already. I'm ready. Jin spoke in a pointlessly grim tone and stiffly raised his head. Shin Woo chuckled and picked the Skeleton Commander's rib bone. Because it was the only one which would increase health. And if I'm right, it'll probably what? You'll know if you experience it firsthand. Bone Reinforcement. Bone Reinforcement is being implemented on Jin Taylor by consuming ALV5 Skeleton Commander's rib bone. Health has increased by 1. You share a portion of its memories and experiences. A defensive seal? If there comes a time when I have to use that, then my family line will end on that day as well. Nameless Heir. This time, Shin Woo received 1 stat point and only need 1 more to level up. Of course, Jin obviously got more than 3 points from it. Suddenly, a dreary black light burst from Jin's body. It was an outburst of mana that indicated that he was leveling up. Is it because of the contract? I feel a bit strange, too. It felt as though Jin's nausea was transmitted to Shin Woo in its entirety. He calmly stepped back and observed Jin's level up. Kreisha also watched with interest. It seems much more intense than a human's level up. Is it because he's leveling up to 5? Is there something special about level 5? Yeah. It's the level where your karma pieces, which are divided into several branches, are made one, and for the first time, your true path is decided. Level 5 is the level where you are considered high rank. Kreisha added that she became an ice magician at level 5, so she was forced to walk on that path from now on. After hearing that, when he thought about it, Shin Woo had acquired the Avenger karma at first, then the Trickster karma, and several other karmas as well, but all of these were gradually sorted out. Now, his promotion to a true Joker was right ahead of him, so he thought she wasn't exactly wrong. It's almost over. The dreary black light wrapping around Jin gradually disappeared, revealing the vastly changed Jin from within. The first thing he noticed was his frame. It had a metallic sheen to it. I was probably really affected by steel body. Besides, I don't really have any other active skills. No one had asked, yet Jin preemptively explained. The blue blazing goblin fire in his eye sockets had also intensified as well. And from the absorbed bone, I got a skill that's like a lifesaver. The moment I get hit by an attack, it creates a magical shield that nullifies a portion of the damage. It's truly a vague skill. As I thought, it's the skill that the Skeleton Commander used at the end. Then shouldn't you have gotten this skill? After all, you wind up in dangerous situations more often than me. And what ended up happening to the Skeleton Commander who used that skill? He died. The aforementioned skill was a lifesaver in unforeseen situations, but it wasn't suited for a warrior who fought on the front lines. Therefore, Jin, who acted like a warhorse, would be better served learning the skill, and it would lessen the chances of him getting hit by an unforeseen attack that would take him out of the battlefield. You know, I heard that as you indirectly telling me that my body's really weak, so I should take care of myself. I'll tell it to you straight up. If you don't like it, then let's train some more. Jin became level 5. His stat effectiveness should have gone up, so his monstrous speed should have gotten even faster. Therefore, he would need to properly control that speed, as well as possess a skill that protected his body. Jin also understood that Shin Woo's was looking out for him and didn't say anything more. He pledged that he would try hard to more naturally utilize Steel Body, as well as the skill he just obtained. It's your guy's turn next. We've been waiting. The Pauls had distinguished themselves in battle. Frankly, the reason that Shin Woo, Jin, and Kraisha were able to move separately was because the Pauls had taken down the skeleton commoners, as well as the soldiers neatly and quickly, which were so numerous that they would have been a hassle to deal with. When I look at it this way, it makes me want to bring them along with me. However, he couldn't. Considering their mobility, it was correct to just leave them be. If for no other reason, it was important that he reinforce them now. Truthfully, he thought about ignoring the cost and just selling the bones at the secret shop, but most of them were from ordinary, non-elite monsters, and he remembered that he would have to sell them at a comparatively low price compared to buying them, so he decided against it. Let's reinforce the ones close to level 4 first. I don't know how much stronger you could get, but there were bones amassed in front of him. The Pauls stood side by side, as if indicating that they could endure whatever came their way. Shin Woo nodded his head and raised a bone. Shin Woo had already ground the level 1 skeleton bones into medicine, yet funnily enough, there were more than 10,000 bones remaining that were level 2 and up. He then spent the time listening to their screams for a tedious 3 hours. LV4 Doom Factor, Paul 102. I did it, Captain. Yeah, good job. As a result of investing all of level 2 and level 3 bones into them, more than 10 of the Pauls leveled up to level 4. Shin Woo thought that their paths would differ as they absorbed different bones, but he was wrong. All of the skeletons who had become level 4 became Doom Factors. They obtained a higher level of strength than before, and those who hadn't leveled up were envious of them. I want to grow too. Then you need to hunt more. It seems like I'll be in this general area for a bit, so hunt strong monsters however you can and bring the bones to me. I'll reinforce you guys with them. I understand. Thank you, Captain. Surprisingly, they departed immediately. Without even telling him when they'd meet again. He was pleased that they showed such an unbelievable desire to improve for undead, but, ultimately, he just shrugged his shoulders. It was unlikely that they'd return in just 10 days. Then is it your turn now, Shin Woo? It's dangerous, so take a few steps back. Kraisha was excessively inquisitive. It felt as though she would bite off his hand bones and eat them if it would help in figuring out Shin Woo's magic. After Shin Woo had commanded the golems to protect him from a bit far away, he gathered the rest of the bones in one spot. With an equal amount of level 5 and level 4 bones. Roughly speaking, he didn't think he would get a new skill. On the bright side, he had the skeleton commander's skull, so he felt like it would at least improve his command skill. He'd learned so many skills, and now most of them were starting to overlap. Bone reinforcement. Implementing bone reinforcement by consuming all of the gathered bones. Strength has increased by 13, agility by 11, health by 14, and magic by 5. The low-rank regeneration skill has become LV7. The low-rank command skill has become LV8. You have become level 5. All stats increase by 20. Your inventory has doubled. You have become able to control the elements themselves. You may be an undead, but you are a pure undead, unaffected by the curse, so you have evolved into an elemental skeleton. You have become the world's only Joker. No one can control your karma, and whatever you decide to become, it is your choice alone. The transformation wasn't as intense as he'd expected. Compared to when he had become level 4, where all his equipment was absorbed and his stats increased sharply all at once. It didn't feel like much of a big deal simultaneously absorbing a dozen bones and leveling up. It felt like there was much more tension back when he'd figured out how to make a high-rank administrative seal since he hadn't been able to recreate it for so long. He felt strangely disappointed, but Shin Woo examined his body and soon realized what a huge misunderstanding he was making. It's worlds apart. His magic and strength condensed within his body, further enhancing the health and mana that has been accumulated in his bones. It seemed the more the mana bone skill developed, the more his health and magic would balance out, due to its ability to contain mana. And now that he was level 5 and his body was completely restructured, that became apparent even from the outside. His hard work starting from level 1 was reflected in his current body, so he felt deeply moved. Ooh, your build's completely different now. Shin Woo, you really look like a boss mob right now. You look as if you're level 6 or 7. You're one to talk. You know how absolute the difference between levels is. Shin Woo snorted and replied to Kracia, and took a brief deep breath. Then he checked his stats. Shin Woo, Elemental Skeleton Joker. He who conquers the impossible, 2 other titles. LV5, Status Effectiveness 170%. Strength 397, Agility 376, Health 372, Magic 577. Passive Skills. Acting LV11, Invisible Heart LV3, Low Rank Avenger LV2. Intermediate Bursting Thunder LV1, Intermediate Mana Bone LV1, Intermediate Shadow Sprint LV1, Low Rank Command LV8, Intermediate Assimilation LV1, Intermediate Combat Sense LV4. Active Skills. Disguise LV1, Bone Reinforcement LV6, Rule of Bone LV4, Bone Armory LV2, Low Rank Shriek of the Dead LV8, Low Rank Regeneration LV7, Sacrifice LV1. Elements. Low Rank Fire LV4, Intermediate Acid LV4, Intermediate Lightning LV1. Resistances. Holy. Max. Curses. Max. Acid. Low Rank LV9, Ice. Intermediate LV2. Shin Woo looked vacantly at his dazzling status and then asked Jin with a vacant voice. Jin, is your status effectiveness also 170%? Yeah. It seems like that's the same for everyone, and when you get to level 6, it becomes 200%. So the gradually increasing effectiveness increases even further, huh? He could outright say this. This world wasn't set up such that a lower-leveled individual could beat a higher-leveled individual. Shin Woo suddenly regarded him beating the level 5 treasure eater when he was still at level 3 as a miracle. Is it even possible to beat a level 6 opponent? You can only reach level 6 by accumulating 3,200 stats, and the effectiveness of one's stats are even increased by another 30%. There's way too much of a difference. Even if he factored in Jin, who at least doubled his fighting strength, it was the same. He wasn't confident that he could defeat Kracia if they were far off from each other. Especially when he considered the power of the catalyst magic she'd cast just recently. Is Bursting Thunder and the Reinforced Elements my only shot? Those would increase the level of my magic, and if I were to add Rule of Bone to that, the level of my physical abilities would increase as well. With that, I would be able to inflict an injury at the very least. The reason I was able to take down an iron golem in one shot was because of those 2 abilities. The power to overcome the handicap of levels. Various skills were united as one, and evolved. In the end, these few skills had gotten to a level that could be called authorities. Shin Woo could safely say that he was ahead of all the other heroes in this regard. He suddenly realized what a huge blessing it was that he acquired Bursting Thunder from defeating the zombie hero. Shin Woo wanted to assess his strength as objectively as possible, and around the time he mulled over it, Kracia, who had been looking straight at him, seemed to be deliberating something and then said this, as if it were nothing. Shin Woo, you should be able to reach level 7. Stop complimenting me. Stop. It's frightening just thinking about it. No matter how hard he struggled, would he be able to scratch Guillotine Steelworker? If he rode atop Jin's back and charged at full speed with the Drake Horn Lance, he might be able to land a telling blow, but there's no guarantee that Guillotine Steelworker would just sit there and take it. Plus, it would be his turn to attack after. No, you can do it because you realized what's important early on and kept refining yourself. I've never seen anyone who could harmonize their body and mana together so perfectly. Perhaps it might have been easier because your body's only made of bones. You want to go? I'm just happy that there's more for me to study since you leveled up. There was absolutely no lies in what she said. She was genuinely happy that Shin Woo had leveled up. It looked as though she just wanted to stay here and study his magic. Shin Woo spoke carefully, stopping her. There's something I need to do before that, so just stay put while looking at this. Oh. Shin Woo had thrown her the limited order bone core. Many of its function had been released and changed due to Shin Woo, and there was a lock set up that allowed those he'd approved of to control the golems. Realizing this, Kraysha's eyes opened wide. Are you a genius? You'll probably get something out of studying that. Then, I'll get going. Where are you going anyway? Kraysha wasn't the only one curious. Jin also looked curious and asked. Shin Woo briefly explained God's garden to them. Kraysha was disgusted, and Jin sported an odd expression. Don't you want to meet her too? I do, and I don't. It feels like I was too greedy, and nowadays it makes me think. That's right. That's because he had familiarized himself with karma. As he adapted and developed in this world, he became acutely aware of how childish he had been. Shin Woo could definitely agree with that sentiment. But since he still wanted to give her an earful for not telling him about what was going to happen to him, he didn't really reply. Would you like to swap out 10 permits to God's secret shop for 1 permit to God's garden? Shin Woo knew he had 11 permits right now. In other words, even if he didn't acquire what he wanted from God's garden, he could go to the secret shop later if he wanted. Shin Woo unhesitatingly nodded his head. Soon, a blinding light burst in the air, and a smallish light descended upon his head. You have acquired a permit to God's garden. Would you like to enter now? You may bring the contracted Jin Tailor with you. Yeah. He didn't think the 1+1 rule would be applied here as well. In any case, Shin Woo thought it wouldn't be bad to take him along, so he looked back at Jin. Jin seemingly understood what Shin Woo was implying and nodded his head with a bitter expression. Kraysha was examining the limited order bone core with great interest and just lightly waved her hand at them. We're entering together. You have used a permit to God's garden and are entering God's garden. Like when he entered God's secret shop, the surrounding landscape softly melted away. Shin Woo knew it was a senior-level teleportation spell, a level he couldn't yet reach. It was a spell that transported one's consciousness into this space, which was neither the underground nor surface. First, his surroundings turned to white. Next, flowers he didn't even know the names of bloomed on the ground and emitted a refreshing scent. There was a gust of wind, as well as sunlight. A silver table formed and chairs rose up. Finally, a beauty with red hair appeared on the opposite side. She resembled Plain, but she was also extremely different. Before him was a woman who possessed countless appearances. The woman saw Shin Woo and spoke leisurely, as if she had been waiting for him. Why don't you sit down? All right. Shin Woo replied meekly and sat down in the chair. He had just noticed, but he had returned to his human form. He thought this might happen, as this was a mental world. Whatever appearance he himself perceived would manifest in this world. He was touched that he was in his original human form again, but he wasn't too shaken, since he was well aware that this appearance just existed in his consciousness. Therefore, he instead asked his first question. Where did Jin go? Did you really think I wouldn't be able to talk to you both at the same time? He thought that they would both meet God at the same time, like when they went to the secret shop, but it seems like they each received a one-on-one talk. He was worried that Jin had already been caught up in God's pace. However, it seemed as though God had seen right through him and laughed softly. I didn't call you to punish you, so don't worry. Your delicate and innocent partner should easily get a new blessing. You see, there's a suitable skill that'll strengthen him. It sounds like that's not the same for me. Exactly. You're neither delicate nor innocent, are you? God tilted her head above the table, resting her chin in her hand. She was clearly looking straight at him. Her eyes looked truly amused. There's nothing more I can do for you. I assure you, your talent in handling mana is greater than any hero before you. If I knew you had such talent, then I wouldn't have gone through the trouble of turning you into a mere skeleton. The moment he heard that, it would be a lie to say he wasn't pissed. Before she sent him to the underground empire, she was the one who had to ascertain his talent and take measures. However, it seems as though she'd noticed the dissatisfaction in his eyes and waved her hand. Even I don't have a way to measure how talented someone is who hasn't yet manifested mana. The only thing I could do was to listen to your wish and try to answer it as best I can. Well, it is true that my request was excessive. At the time, I was so scared of the Empire that I was just trying to figure out a way to stay safe no matter what. But you should have told me. You should have explained karma in more detail. I definitely said that you'd have to pay the price back then. Hearing that, Shin Woo briefly gazed at God. Her attitude pissed him off, but he couldn't shake off the thought that she had deliberately responded so absent-mindedly to rile him up. It felt as though she tried pissing him off so that he wouldn't think deeply about the subject. Therefore, he thought of something else. Perhaps it wasn't just due to her ill nature that she turned him into a skeleton, but another important reason. However, God stubbornly didn't give him the chance to ask. Sorry to disappoint you, but we can't talk for very long. There's nothing I can do for you in terms of skills or karma, so I'll give you an item in exchange. If you have any other questions, ask me next time. Then I'll ask a quick question. Is it fine to leave Ethan Cruz as is? Shin Woo had asked under the assumption that his senior hero, Ethan Cruz, was an S.O.B., causing God to momentarily pause. However, it wasn't something that she could just easily pass over. It's really hard for me to control those who I've bestowed my power to. I can't take back what I've given, and I cannot personally exercise my power. That's enough with the pretense. What do you really think? Honestly, I don't really care what happens so long as the Empire is purified. Ethan Cruz is, at the very least, a truly devoted hero in that aspect. That was bullshit. So much so that it was unbelievable that God had said it herself. God must have realized that what she was said was too harsh, as she quickly added. But don't worry. He can't do anything to you. Ah, your partner too. If there was one thing similar between us, it's that our curse resistance is maxed out. It seems like that asshole's authority is connected to the curse. Well, the Empire is filled to the brim with the curse, so if you want to get stronger, someone who can handle the curse would have an advantage. Wait a sec. Did you plan for that from the start by giving us these authorities? I wonder. I just gave you what you wished for. God played innocent until the very end, but one part of her face was stiff. Shin Woo couldn't help but acknowledge that he'd been robbed, by this short talk. God's eyebrows quivered. Did you gain a lot in the Empire? There was a lot I could recover from countless people's memories. It's all because of you. You desperately wished for immortality above all else, yet it seems like you're actually ignoring that ability right now and are moving in an effort to get stronger. That's quite funny. It's because I possess immortality that I can move so proactively. So I don't regret it. I'm satisfied with myself right now. The moment he finished speaking, Shin Woo was engulfed by blazing black flames. The flames that only burned what its owner wished for it to burn. His skin, hair, muscles, and flesh were all burned, and what remained was a level 5 elemental skeleton joker. He had completely discarded the part that was still attached to his human self, and he had fully accepted himself as is. Ha! God couldn't believe what she was seeing and just laughed. And to God, Shin Woo firmly said, "Now I'll tell you what I want. A level 6 item is enough, right? Please give me a quest." Neither a skill nor an item, but a quest? God tilted her head, wondering what he was plotting, and then she heard something unbelievable. I would like to give the heroes who have died and become undead peace. Please give me their location, as well as a quest to eliminate them. Chapter 17. You're back? It doesn't look like you've changed much. What about you? Ah. Kraisha, who had been focusing on the core, greeted them, and Shin Woo just tilted his head. He soon realized that she was talking about Jin, not him. But it was strange that the man in question, Jin, wasn't even here. Kraisha spoke unimportantly. He just started running all of a sudden. He should be back soon. Perhaps seeing his human appearance again within the mental world was traumatizing for him. Shin Woo promised that he would treat Jin well when he came back, and opened his mouth for a second time. Do you know what ability Jin got? Magic armor. Magic armor? Yeah. Jin got an ability that creates a magic barrier, right? That and steel body fused together to make the ability enclose his outer body in magic steel armor. God's blessing was added as well, so I suppose we can trust in its effectiveness. Honestly, it was a skill that greatly supplemented his strength and health. Hearing that, Shin Woo marveled at the fact Jin asked God to fuse those two skills together. Since it was an ability created by God, its power was assured. Moreover, Jin had acquired a skill that supplemented both his strength and health, so it was easy to figure out what Jin needed to focus on in order to further develop in the future. Magic. It's a good skill for Jin, who had it rough due to his irregularly high agility. It seems God was fairly considerate. If she had been that considerate before, he wondered how good it might have been, but he had to be satisfied with the past. At that thought, Shin Woo smiled bitterly, and Kraisha then inquired. But it looks like you haven't changed at all. I really haven't changed at all. Jin received such a huge present from her, yet. Ah, did your entire share go to Jin? You see, I got something else. Shin Woo replied, revealing that he had no intention of telling her, and Kraisha looked at him coyly. However, Shin Woo was immune to honey traps, so he just responded with a thin smile. She was only accompanying them temporarily to study Shin Woo's magic, so he had no intention of sharing everything with her. Heroes will. As a result of you reaching an agreement with God, you have opened up a new test. Though the graves of the heroes she sent to the underground empire before are mostly hidden, her blessing still remains. Please give them peace, inherit their strength and will, and purify the empire. But be careful, because these heroes, who have come back in undeath, still believe themselves to be heroes. Quest reward. Every hero you put to rest. 1 additional permit to God's secret shop, and invisible heart reinforcement. Normally, when one takes down an undead hero, they receive the undead hero's perium, as well as a permit to God's secret shop. He would get an additional permit for every kill as well, so if he resolved himself and farmed them, it wouldn't be impossible to go to God's garden again. Moreover, there's a reward I didn't even ask for, invisible heart reinforcement. So long as it doesn't increase the skill level under the pretense of reinforcing it, he could honestly say that he was excited about this clause. In any case, he now knew where all the undead heroes scattered around the empire were, meaning that he had fulfilled his objective in meeting God. I'm back. Welcome back. Ooh. Shin Woo was suddenly satisfied with his decision and nodded his head. Then, Jin returned. Seeing the magic steel armor that completely covered him, Shin Woo was in awe. Though it was called magic armor, that wouldn't do it justice. It wasn't simply armor. By wearing it, Jin's body would be reinforced, and the term powered suit was more appropriate to describe this authority. So this is what it meant by supplementing his strength and health. With this, even if he's hit quite hard, he wouldn't feel the impact. Is your mana okay? Just maintaining it doesn't use any mana. It uses up mana whenever I'm hit, or I use a lot of force. I think you should focus on magic, rather than health and strength from now on. Yeah, probably should. Despite the fact that his ability had developed rapidly, Jin acted way too calmly. Seeing that, Shin Woo was about to carelessly ask if he was okay, but blocked his mouth with his hand. He had returned to being a human being for just an instant, and was now a skeleton horse again, so there was no way he was okay. However, was it because of their assimilation? Jin noticed the slight bit of hesitation and movement from Shin Woo, as well as roughly figuring out what he was thinking. I admire you, Shin Woo. Stop it. Jin understood that Shin Woo was trying to be considerate of him, and was suddenly surprised that Shin Woo could just stand there so calmly, despite experiencing the same thing he did. It felt like his own seething emotions were beginning to abate. As I thought, it seems like joining up with you was a good idea. Man, stop it already. Jin chuckled seeing Shin Woo look so uncomfortable. Kraisha decided not to interfere with their conversation, and immersed herself in the study of the core. It was good that she did. The two skeleton heroes began to look past whatever pretense she put up. That woman. It doesn't seem like she's just ill-natured, Jin said. Shin Woo also thought that way. You want to say that she made us into undead on purpose, right? Yeah, but I don't know why she did it. I wonder. It may unexpectedly be something unimportant. She could have thought that she should send undead this time, since nothing was going right by sending humans. Shin Woo thought he'd seen God's true intentions in her garden. She said that it didn't matter what happened, so long as the Empire was purified, but doesn't that show just how desperate she is? Wouldn't her true intention be that she wanted to purify the Empire, no matter the cost? Is that really the only reason? Even if there were another reason, we can't know now. So, we have to learn more about this world. Irema Steelworkers Golems, General Segal's undead, the Emperor in the capital. As well as the Skeleton Commander's last words, I wanted to leave the Empire. He was sure that the secret that surrounded the underground empire wasn't simple. He needed to move more proactively, if for no other reason than to figure that secret out. Do you think our senior heroes will know anything about it? Maybe. I can't really ask about it in the chatting channel. Shin Woo just shrugged his shoulders. Truthfully, he wasn't much different from Kraisha. He couldn't easily trust someone before meeting them in person. Jin roughly thought the same as him, as he didn't even use the chatting channel. Then what do we do now? Before that, Kraisha? I want to keep looking at this a bit more. Kraisha's cheeks were flushed because she was pissed that she hadn't been able to understand the core in detail. That would mean that she, who studied magic all her life, was lagging behind Shin Woo, so she couldn't help but be pissed. Of course, it was also due to the special circumstances he'd faced. It's probably impossible for me to create a golem's mana. But now that it's come to this, I'm going to figure out a way to hack the generated mana no matter what. Remember to tell me how you did it, if you do find out. Yeah. Shin Woo was only more talented than Kraisha in changing mana and handling it, but he couldn't even compare to her in terms of magical theory. He thought that perhaps it was actually a good idea to leave the core with her and stood up. Then we got to go to the sewers now. I'll definitely eat pudding, no matter what. I wish it were pudding that we could actually eat. They had been talking about huge topics like God's true objective and the Empire's secret, yet they suddenly returned to reality and talked about the sewer dungeon, which was truly distressing. Regardless, Jin had to follow along, so he just sighed. You don't need to go to the secret shop? There's still a long time before I reach level 6, so I'll wait a while. Of course, he had become level 5 in the time since he'd last gone to the secret shop, as well as accumulating more than 3 million perium from clearing out the golems as well as a city. However, he had to raise his stats by around 1,500 to reach the next level, so what would buying 1 or 2 bones do? He also only had 1 permit to God's secret shop left from entering God's garden, so he planned to gather more perium until he at least acquired 1 more permit. Then that means we have to go into the sewers. I wonder if there's a secret facility here as well. It'd be great if there were. But unfortunately, they had no such luck. There was no secret facility there. Since Anti-Skull didn't exist in every single city's sewers. However, the sewers were overflowing with slimes that thrived from eating filth, and Shin Woo didn't just simply kill them. For dozens of years, slimes gradually and naturally fused together and developed their abilities. However, The great slime from last time was afraid of my flames and started to eat any slimes that it came across. How can you be so sure? Jin's goblin fire was tinged with sympathy as he saw the slimes run around hectically at the handful of flames placed atop their heads. How can you call yourself a human being? Can't you see I'm a skeleton? Perhaps because this was a commercial city that various people frequented, the amount of wastewater in here was no joke. Also, the quantity of discharged mana was equally large, so perhaps that was why it was a level 3 dungeon. The slimes that they encountered from the start of the dungeon were at least level 2. But how could he progress by killing them? The only remaining answer was for them to fuse. Now you guys. Fuse together. I said fuse together. You. Soon, one of the slimes responded to Shin Woo's devilish whispers. Ultimately, it realized that if it didn't want to be burnt, leaving behind only its core, it would have to eat its comrades. Its target struggled, but the slime was ultimately absorbed, and it seemed excited about its newfound size as it started to eat the others as well. In just a short while, it had gathered a considerable amount of mana and managed to level up and become an elite at the same time. LV3 Great Slime. See? It worked. It's really easy to make an elite monster. Jin looked terrified, and the great slime in the middle, who looked at them vacantly, finished eating all of the slimes and rushed further into the passage, as if it knew it was still no match for Shin Woo. Since it was a level 3 dungeon, there should be some level 3 slimes in here. It should be able to transform into a king slime after eating all of its competitors, no, perhaps even something greater than that. Shin Woo didn't hide his anticipation and followed behind it. Jin just prayed that he would be able to leave these dirty sewers soon. Gororororoo. Ooh. After that, it had finally finished eating all of the slimes in the dungeon and evolved into a level 5 Great King Slime. It wanted to get revenge on Shin Woo, but unfortunately, it couldn't move properly because it had gotten too big, so it was swept away by Shin Woo's flames and died after one grand explosion. You're back? It doesn't look like you've changed much. What about you? Ah. Kreisha, who had been focusing on the core, greeted them and Shin Woo just tilted his head. He soon realized that she was talking about Jin, not him. But it was strange that the man in question, Jin, wasn't even here. Kreisha spoke unimportantly. He just started running all of a sudden. He should be back soon. Perhaps seeing his human appearance again within the mental world was traumatizing for him. Shin Woo promised that he would treat Jin well when he came back, and opened his mouth for a second time. Do you know what ability Jin got? Magic armor. Magic armor? Yeah. Jin got an ability that creates a magic barrier, right? That and steel body fused together to make the ability enclose his outer body in magic steel armor. God's blessing was added as well, so I suppose we can trust in its effectiveness. Honestly, it was a skill that greatly supplemented his strength and health. Hearing that, Shin Woo marveled at the fact Jin asked God to fuse those two skills together. Since it was an ability created by God, its power was assured. Moreover, Jin had acquired a skill that supplemented both his strength and health, so it was easy to figure out what Jin needed to focus on in order to further develop in the future. Magic. It's a good skill for Jin, who had it rough due to his irregularly high agility. It seems God was fairly considerate. If she had been that considerate before, he wondered how good it might have been, but he had to be satisfied with the past. At that thought, Shin Woo smiled bitterly, and Kreisha then inquired. But it looks like you haven't changed at all. I really haven't changed at all. Jin received such a huge present from her, yet. Ah, did your entire share go to Jin? You see, I got something else. Shin Woo replied, revealing that he had no intention of telling her, and Kreisha looked at him coyly. However, Shin Woo was immune to honey traps, so he just responded with a thin smile. She was only accompanying them temporarily to study Shin Woo's magic, so he had no intention of sharing everything with her. Hero's will. As a result of you reaching an agreement with God, you have opened up a new test. Though the graves of the heroes she sent to the underground empire before are mostly hidden, her blessing still remains. Please give them peace, inherit their strength and will, and purify the empire. But be careful, because these heroes, who have come back in undeath, still believe themselves to be heroes. Quest reward. Every hero you put to rest. 1 additional permit to God's secret shop, and invisible heart reinforcement. Normally, when one takes down an undead hero, they receive the undead hero's perium, as well as a permit to God's secret shop. He would get an additional permit for every kill as well, so if he resolved himself and farmed them, it wouldn't be impossible to go to God's garden again. Moreover, there's a reward I didn't even ask for, invisible heart reinforcement. So long as it doesn't increase the skill level under the pretense of reinforcing it, he could honestly say that he was excited about this clause. In any case, he now knew where all the undead heroes scattered around the empire were, meaning that he had fulfilled his objective in meeting God. I'm back. Welcome back. Ooh. Shin Woo was suddenly satisfied with his decision and nodded his head. Then, Jin returned. Seeing the magic steel armor that completely covered him, Shin Woo was in awe. Though it was called magic armor, that wouldn't do it justice. It wasn't simply armor. By wearing it, Jin's body would be reinforced, and the term powered suit was more appropriate to describe this authority. So this is what it meant by supplementing his strength and health. With this, even if he's hit quite hard, he wouldn't feel the impact. Is your mana okay? Just maintaining it doesn't use any mana. It uses up mana whenever I'm hit, or I use a lot of force. I think you should focus on magic, rather than health and strength from now on. Yeah, probably should. Despite the fact that his ability had developed rapidly, Jin acted way too calmly. Seeing that, Shin Woo was about to carelessly ask if he was okay, but blocked his mouth with his hand. He had returned to being a human being for just an instant, and was now a skeleton horse again, so there was no way he was okay. However, was it because of their assimilation? Jin noticed the slight bit of hesitation and movement from Shin Woo, as well as roughly figuring out what he was thinking. I admire you, Shin Woo. Stop it. Jin understood that Shin Woo was trying to be considerate of him, and was suddenly surprised that Shin Woo could just stand there so calmly, despite experiencing the same thing he did. It felt like his own seething emotions were beginning to abate. As I thought, it seems like joining up with you was a good idea. Man, stop it already. Jin chuckled seeing Shin Woo look so uncomfortable. Kreisha decided not to interfere with their conversation, and immersed herself in the study of the core. It was good that she did. The two skeleton heroes began to look past whatever pretense she put up. That woman. It doesn't seem like she's just ill-natured, Jin said. Shin Woo also thought that way. You want to say that she made us into undead on purpose, right? Yeah, but I don't know why she did it. I wonder. It may unexpectedly be something unimportant. She could have thought that she should send undead this time, since nothing was going right by sending humans. Shin Woo thought he'd seen God's true intentions in her garden. She said that it didn't matter what happened, so long as the empire was purified, but doesn't that show just how desperate she is? Wouldn't her true intention be that she wanted to purify the empire, no matter the cost? Is that really the only reason? Even if there were another reason, we can't know now. So, we have to learn more about this world. Irema Steelworkers Golems, General Seagald's undead, the Emperor in the capital. As well as the skeleton commander's last words, I wanted to leave the empire. He was sure that the secret that surrounded the underground empire wasn't simple. He needed to move more proactively, if for no other reason than to figure that secret out. Do you think our senior heroes will know anything about it? Maybe. I can't really ask about it in the chatting channel. Shin Woo just shrugged his shoulders. Truthfully, he wasn't much different from Kreisha. He couldn't easily trust someone before meeting them in person. Jin roughly thought the same as him, as he didn't even use the chatting channel. Then what do we do now? Before that, Kreisha? I want to keep looking at this a bit more. Kreisha's cheeks were flushed because she was pissed that she hadn't been able to understand the core in detail. That would mean that she, who studied magic all her life, was lagging behind Shin Woo, so she couldn't help but be pissed. Of course, it was also due to the special circumstances he'd faced. It's probably impossible for me to create a golem's mana. But now that it's come to this, I'm going to figure out a way to hack the generated mana no matter what. Remember to tell me how you did it, if you do find out. Yeah. Shin Woo was only more talented than Kraisha in changing mana and handling it, but he couldn't even compare to her in terms of magical theory. He thought that perhaps it was actually a good idea to leave the core with her and stood up. Then we got to go to the sewers now. I'll definitely eat pudding, no matter what. I wish it were pudding that we could actually eat. They had been talking about huge topics like God's true objective and the Empire's secret, yet they suddenly returned to reality and talked about the sewer dungeon, which was truly distressing. Regardless, Jin had to follow along, so he just sighed. You don't need to go to the secret shop? There's still a long time before I reach level 6, so I'll wait a while. Of course, he had become level 5 in the time since he'd last gone to the secret shop, as well as accumulating more than 3 million perium from clearing out the golems as well as a city. However, he had to raise his stats by around 1,500 to reach the next level, so what would buying 1 or 2 bones do? He also only had 1 permit to God's secret shop left from entering God's garden, so he planned to gather more perium until he at least acquired 1 more permit. Then that means we have to go into the sewers. I wonder if there's a secret facility here as well. It'd be great if there were. But unfortunately, they had no such luck. There was no secret facility there. Since Anti-Skull didn't exist in every single city's sewers. However, the sewers were overflowing with slimes that thrived from eating filth, and Shin Woo didn't just simply kill them. For dozens of years, slimes gradually and naturally fused together and developed their abilities. However, the great slime from last time was afraid of my flames and started to eat any slimes that it came across. How can you be so sure? Jin's goblin fire was tinged with sympathy as he saw the slimes run around hectically at the handful of flames placed atop their heads. How can you call yourself a human being? Can't you see I'm a skeleton? Perhaps because this was a commercial city that various people frequented, the amount of wastewater in here was no joke. Also, the quantity of discharged mana was equally large, so perhaps that was why it was a level 3 dungeon. The slimes that they encountered from the start of the dungeon were at least level 2. But how could he progress by killing them? The only remaining answer was for them to fuse. Now you guys. Fuse together. I said fuse together. You. Soon, one of the slimes responded to Shin Woo's devilish whispers. Ultimately, it realized that if it didn't want to be burnt, leaving behind only its core, it would have to eat its comrades. Its target struggled, but the slime was ultimately absorbed, and it seemed excited about its newfound size as it started to eat the others as well. In just a short while, it had gathered a considerable amount of mana and managed to level up and become an elite at the same time. LV3 Great Slime. See? It worked. It's really easy to make an elite monster. Jin looked terrified, and the great slime in the middle, who looked at them vacantly, finished eating all of the slimes and rushed further into the passage, as if it knew it was still no match for Shin Woo. Since it was a level 3 dungeon, there should be some level 3 slimes in here. It should be able to transform into a king slime after eating all of its competitors, no, perhaps even something greater than that. Shin Woo didn't hide his anticipation and followed behind it. Jin just prayed that he would be able to leave these dirty sewers soon. Gororororoo. Ooh. After that, it had finally finished eating all of the slimes in the dungeon and evolved into a level 5 Great King Slime. It wanted to get revenge on Shin Woo, but unfortunately, it couldn't move properly because it had gotten too big, so it was swept away by Shin Woo's flames and died after one grand explosion. You have absorbed the Great King Slime's bone core. All stats have increased by 1. Proficiency of Rule of Bone has increased by 2%. So stingy. I went through all that trouble to make a level 5 elite monster, but I only get 4 stats in return. It'll take several months to get to level 6 at this rate. Isn't that still really quick? Even some of his seniors, who'd arrived in the underground empire long before him, weren't level 6 yet, so it was indeed quick. However, Shin Woo, who had the disposition of a thief, thought he'd be able to continue developing at a rapid pace, so he couldn't be happy about this. Most of my skills have gotten to the intermediate level, so I probably won't be able to get much stat growth from leveling up my skills. The only things left remaining are achievements. Don't tell me you're going to go around looking for high-leveled elite monsters. Just go step by step like you've been doing. TCH. Hearing Jin's astute observation, Shin Woo clicked his non-existent tongue and examined the treasure chest. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything noteworthy within. A low-rank swordsmanship skill book? It seems like there really are people who don't have this level of skill before they clear this dungeon. There's a pair of useless level 2 iron boots. At least this is a little better. A level 3 tempered steel shield. As soon as he held it, the material turned to bone and was absorbed by him. It felt as though he had satisfied some sort of condition, and at that moment, his skill leveled up. The bone armory skill has become LV3. Health and magic have increased by 5. You can fuse the materials and special characteristics of the equipment you have absorbed with another piece of equipment and supplement it, but the level is still too low, so it's only half effective. Updating information regarding the equipment stored in Bone Armory. Ha! Shin Woo was flustered at the sudden series of events. In the blink of an eye, the shield, as well as armor and helmet he was wearing, disappeared. Shin Woo stood, flustered, and a message slowly appeared before him. Bone Armory LV3. LV4 Acid Bone Armor, Defense 250 to 410, Acid Type Effectiveness plus 10%. LV4 Acid Bone Leg, Defense 210 to 320, Acid Type Effectiveness plus 10%. LV4 Acid Bone Shield, Defense 350 to 400, Acid Type Effectiveness plus 10%. LV4 Acid Skull Helm, Defense 250 to 310, Acid Type Effectiveness plus 10%. LV4 Lightning Tooth, Attack Power 450 to 480, Lightning LV4, Effectiveness of Bursting Thunder plus 20%. LV4 Melting Bone Double Axe, Attack Power 480 to 760, Acid LV3, Acid Type Effectiveness plus 20%. LV5 Drake Horn Lance, Attack Power 1000 to 1200, Effectiveness of Charge-related skills plus 40%. How is this? Of course, he had a rough idea. He thought of each and every piece of equipment separately before, but now he could combine the characteristics and materials of absorbed equipment into another piece of equipment to create a sturdier and more powerful one. Shin Woo examined the updated description of the equipment stored within Bone Armory, and he became even more sure of it. Through the Bone Armory skill, the Acid Skull Helm's materials and characteristics were fused with the other defensive equipment and reinforced. Because of that, the once level 3 armor all became level 4. They really were reinforced. Shin Woo summoned his upper and lower body armor, equipped them, and interjected. Not only had the armors inherited the Acid Skull Helm's materials and characteristics in its entirety and gotten much tougher, but the magic within these armors covered in a slight green energy was definitely improving Shin Woo's acid element. If he were to equip the Acid Bone Armor, leg, and helm, while wielding the Melting Bone Double Axe, the effectiveness of the acid element would increase by 50%. Though it was impossible right now since he could still only summon 3 pieces of equipment at a time. In other words, I can create a full matching set of equipment with just one piece of the set now. As I thought, it was a good idea to get information on the undead heroes. But the limitations to the skill were quite clear for now. He couldn't transfer the characteristics of the Lightning Tooth or the Drake Horn Lance to other pieces of equipment yet. It was without a doubt because these 2 pieces of equipment were at a higher level than the Bone Armory skill itself. However, the skill level will gradually go up, and if that happens, someday. Shin Woo imagined himself wearing Drake Horn armor and shuddered. He could also obtain an even more powerful piece of equipment and transfer those characteristics to another piece of equipment. I thought it might be possible someday, but I should start gathering equipment that possess various special characteristics. Do they sell equipment in the secret shop too? The dungeon reward by itself was trifling, but he didn't lose out, as it had caused his bone armory to level up. Shin Woo looked much more consolidated and stylish than before. In the process of being affected by the acid skull helm, the upper and lower body armor both changed in appearance, similar to the acid skull helm, and after equipping the armor, he returned to the purified city. Kracia was still struggling with the core. Is it going well? It's going really well. I can do it if you give me one more day. Kracia bluffed, and Shin Woo could tell. That competitive magician was going to figure out everything regarding the core no matter what. For the time being, he just needed to let her be. Then we'll go and clear out the surrounding area, so you just keep studying the core. You guys, follow me. It's an honor. In the name of Steelworker. Ah, perhaps. When they were about to leave, Kracia hastily grabbed him. Did she want to extend the duration of the contract? Shin Woo tilted his head and turned around, and Kracia, while still holding onto the core, requested honestly, even whilst looking extremely embarrassed. If you find any things like wild fruit in the dungeon, then I got it. Since there are no living organisms nearby that can eat fruit, anyway. Thanks, Kracia said, and looked over at Jin. Seeing that, Shin Woo sighed again. Fortunately, Jin didn't say anything. I'm just saying this because it seems like you've misunderstood me, but I'm not envious of that girl just because she's alive. And I don't hate her either. Kracia saw them off, and the rest of them left the city. Shin Woo found a trace of mana, and Jin suddenly spoke while running slowly, since the golems were accompanying them. Shin Woo just tilted his head. Then what is it? It makes me feel really narrow-minded admitting this, but, besides just being human, Kracia is. Nah, it's nothing. Actually, I'd rather not say. You were the one who started, so how can you stop midway? Sorry, it wasn't me. It's my secretary's fault. Jin seemed to be quite concerned about it, so Shin Woo decided to lighten the mood with a joke, but all he got in return was an intense shaking from Jin. Even though he suffered through Jin's reprisal, he remembered when he was young and played with his friends and was very slightly pleased. For a few days, Shin Woo, Jin, and the 3 iron golems used the purified city as their base camp and swept away the undead in the vicinity. They were able to clear a few patrolling battalions of undead that hadn't fallen with their city, killed the undead roaming about, and cleared a few dungeons as well. It seemed as though most of the low-level dungeons were ignored by their seniors, thus Shin Woo and Jin were able to hog them to themselves. Along with that, Level 4 Dungeon. You have acquired a permit for the Kerr Century Winery. All stats within the dungeon increase by 30. The dungeon information is added to your minimap. All of your actions are buffed within the dungeon. The intermediate mana bone skill has become LV2. Magic has increased by 10. You can now maintain your magic for a longer period of time. 5 days after their cleanup of the city's vicinity had begun, Shin Woo struck gold, finding a dungeon that was completely hidden. How the hell did you find this dungeon? With my senses. Shin Woo used Mana Bone as the foundation for his mana detecting ability, and in the process of creating a golem's mana, he realized the elemental categories. That was the start of his explosive growth, and now he was able to find all of the hidden dungeons with just one look of the area. The other day, Prince Altania had boasted how good he was at finding dungeons in the chatting channel, and sure enough, now that he had a knack for mana, it had become much easier to find dungeons. Probably much more proficiently than the prince at that. It should be fine since it's just a level 4 dungeon, but I suppose we should tread with caution. We will protect you. We will take point. The golems, which were strengthened from having their limiters removed, gladly took point. Truthfully, whenever he gave them an order, they would respond way too passionately. Shin Woo cursed at the steelworkers for having bad taste and followed behind the golems. Ha! Something smells sweet. Only after he entered did he ruminate over the dungeon's name, Kerr Century Winery. That's right. A winery. It was a place where they made fermented foods like alcohol or vinegar. And between those two, this smell was distinctly Wine? Did you like wine before? I told you, I was a sprinter. I didn't drink, and I didn't smoke. But that doesn't mean I'm totally clueless of wine. The two were completely calm. Even if the most expensive and delicious wine popped in front of them, what could they do? It's not like they could drink it. Jin was already really depressed, but now he was even gloomier than before. Jin spoke less, and Shin Woo patted his head as they continued onwards. Soon, one of the golems reported, "There are no monsters. I believe the dungeon was sealed in order to protect goods." Yeah, I agree. When they progressed a bit further, they found the cause of that sweet smell, the ripening room. The sight of countless lines of wine barrels was nothing else but magnificent. But there were two things that concerned him. It's become vinegar or has evaporated. One of the two. Definitely not based on the smell. Shin Woo came close to one of the wine barrels and examined it. The material was clearly different from the oak from Earth. It was probably a type of wood that only existed in this world. The barrel possessed a mark that came about due to being singed with flame, and it was clearly in the shape of a letter. It was likely a magic letter that allowed the application of magic on all of the barrels. It truly is a fantasy world. They use magic to ripen wine as well, huh? See, check it. Hurry. Jin had totally forgotten that he couldn't even drink the wine and was extremely excited. Shin Woo smiled bitterly and calmly placed his hand atop the wooden barrel. Whenever he wanted to, he could instinctually use his mana and examine something. He felt like it was natural now. It was all because of his singular focus on the golems, as well as Kratia, who taught him a systematic approach. To be honest, it wasn't very difficult to ascertain the contents of the barrel compared to the limited order bone core, and was soon met with an organized message in front of him. Century Delocus 395. The year prior to the Empire's fall, Mother Earth seemed almost aware of the Empire's fall, and shined brilliantly with the last of its life. The grapes harvested at that time held the highest value ever, and the businessmen of Century Winery did their best to prepare and create wine. The alcohol contained in this barrel was kept in tip-top shape and slowly ripened. However, there wasn't anyone left to drink it by the time it was finished ripening. The wine is at its highest value and will never decrease in value under any circumstances. There are 52 liters of Century Delocus 395 within this wine barrel. This wine was created prior to the fall and was stored properly. The karma of this wine is not light under any circumstances. Normally, the wine within would be full, but as a result of evaporating for dozens of years, there were only 52 liters left. It was kept in tip-top condition through the ripening room and the magic on the barrels and had continued to ripen, so he could tell just how good the wine was without even drinking it. There should be a total of about 3,000 liters in here. Should we just spill it all at once and take a shower in it? That's not such a bad idea, but... Shin Woo looked at the last line added to the explanation and thought deeply. Then spoke after making up his mind. Couldn't we sell this at the secret shop? If he had just one more permit to God's secret shop, he would have used it without any hesitation. However, Shin Woo only had one permit right now, and he didn't know how much he could sell this wine for, so he couldn't take the risk so easily. Shin Woo clicked his tongue and muttered, "Senior Sarah is a prophet." A prophet. You seem to be getting along with our seniors. If you're jealous, then why don't you enter the channel too? D don't want to. Whenever he told Jin, who was jealous of his relationship with other people, to do something about it and go into the chatting channel, he would always say that he didn't want to. Shin Woo just laughed. He could roughly understand how he felt. Normally, the less self-confidence one has, the more passive they become in terms of maintaining relationships with other people. Needless to say, since Jin was a skeleton horse, it was obvious how low his self-esteem was. For starters, let's pack all of the wine into our inventories. Since we don't need to pack food in our inventories, it might have been a waste of space if we hadn't leveled up to 5. As the two rose to level 5, their inventories suddenly doubled in size. They, who didn't really have any necessities in their inventories, possessed inventories that were uselessly large. they managed to fill at least half of their inventories with the wine barrels in the ripening room. This one's 25 liters, and this one's 47 liters. It wasn't a problem with the ripening magic, but there was a difference in the fermented wine's condition at the beginning of the ripening process. Because of that, they all taste different, despite being produced in the same year and being the same age. This might be some sort of craftsmanship as well. So how many liters in total? 1,965 liters. Wow! Though they weren't bottled, it was a truly large amount of wine. If his seniors saw this, they would have fainted, since they would cheer whenever they found a single wine bottle intact in a dungeon or a city. This was all due to Shin Woo, who miraculously found this dungeon, and him nonchalantly releasing the seal, which was a highest rank lock that could only be released by those of the Kerr Century Winery. Of course, Shin Woo trusted that this was something that all of his seniors could do as well. Steelworker, we've found other areas as well. Oh, wow! He had expected them to be here somewhere, and one of the iron golems scattered around, looking out for any potential danger, had found a location that stored bottled wine. Though they weren't stored as perfectly as in the ripening room and there were several that couldn't be used, Shin Woo and Jin marveled at the fact that they could recover 30 bottles of luxurious wine. He'd only suffered ever since being dropped into the Empire, yet only now did he feel like he was actually performing the task of a hero. Isn't it a hero's duty to clear out an empty home? I wonder if there's more stuff here. Probably not. We checked all the facilities outside of the winery. Yeah, you're right. We checked all the fermentation facilities. But the businessmen had set such tight security on the entrance, so how would the grapes have gotten in? Shin Woo briefly thought about it, and his goblin fire swayed unconfidently. The inventory? The inventory isn't part of this world. It only belongs to the heroes. Did they use assassins? The businessmen raised assassins to protect the wine? Then a secret passageway? Yeah. It was highly likely that they brought the grapes in through a secret passageway, as the security at the entrance was so tight. And hypothetically speaking, if the secret passageway was a direct link to the orchard. The orchard might be a dungeon too, though it shouldn't be as impenetrable as this place. How do you even grow grapes underground? This entire empire is underground. Why couldn't they if they had the skills? Ah, that's right. Shin Woo led Jin and the golems, searched the winery, and ultimately succeeded. He released a few more hidden locks and examined the clearing's wall. He broke through the wall, and though it wasn't the size of Golem's railway, it was a quite bright and clean underground railway. It really did exist. Definitely. Though there was only a single wall dividing the underground passage and the winery, the air was quite different. There were several layers of magic applied to the winery to act as a smokescreen so that it couldn't be found, but the railroad, which was outside of the spell's range, wasn't largely protected. What do we do if there are monsters or people aiming for the wine? Take a look around. All right. Huh. Jin looked back and was shocked. The winery they had just left had disappeared, and the railway just kept going on and on. Jin trembled and Shin Woo explained firmly. This railroad probably goes through other facilities. They went so far as to make a smokescreen, so normally, you wouldn't be able to tell it was a winery. Rather than impenetrable security, they chose to hide it naturally. You saw through that? What the hell were you before all this? Just a normal salaryman. Let's go. You guys, get smaller and follow behind me quickly. I understand. Reducing body size. Shin Woo ordered, and the golems compressed their bodies. Though they were a lot smaller than when they had first entered the dungeons, but now they were shorter than 2 meters tall, a small size mode. Through this special mode, which sacrificed their bulk and weight to reduce the size of their tough bodies, their destructive power that came from their weight would be reduced, but their speed would overwhelmingly increase, and was better when they needed to move quickly, like right now. Of course, this wasn't originally a command from the limited order Bone Corps, but Shin Woo possessed a senior administrative authority and was able to unlock the command. There are a lot of forked roads. This way. They went as far as to so seamlessly hide the location of the winery, so it wasn't surprising that there was an absurd amount of forked roads, However, whenever they came across one of them, Shin Woo would boldly choose a path. Jin couldn't help but be curious as he followed behind him. How are you making a decision so quickly? There are periodically some traces of where humans and vehicles went. Actually, to be exact, there are traces of mana being used to erase those tracks. The traces were erased by magic to conceal the tracks, but what did it even mean to grasp the traces of that very mana being used to erase those tracks? It felt as though the businessmen several dozens of years ago were playing in the palm of his hand. Compared to finding the traces of Anti-Skull, this is nothing. 10 minutes of running and following Shin Woo's perfect navigation through the railroad, Shin Woo suddenly stretched his palm towards the sky. The lightning tooth appeared, spun round and round, and shot forward. The lightning tooth flew through the darkness and for a few seconds remained silent. Then, for a moment, sparks scattered through the air. Jigok! You have hunted a LV3 root eater. Far sight was affected by agility, so Jin could see it this time too. There was a large and hideous insect stuck to the ceiling, several kilometers in front of them. The insect emitted an unpleasant sound and approached them, but the lightning tooth cut through it and it fell to the ground. However, that was only the beginning. After it cleaved through the monster, it easily turned directions, and whilst maintaining its full power, found a new target and rushed towards it. The insects that came crawling towards them fell one by one. He began to hunt them resolutely. Kahik! Shah! As the group dashed towards him, they emitted a sound. Aside from that, the underground passage had been completely quiet before, without even the sound of a rock rolling on the floor. However, the underground passage was soon filled with screams. Shin Woo remained focused on the battlefront, and Jin wondered whether he should start running or not, and eventually half-heartedly ran. At that moment, Jin, stop! Okay! Shin Woo ordered, and at that very moment, the final forked road appeared. It divided into 3 paths, and while nothing came out of his objective, the middle path, monsters poured out of the left and right paths as if they were waiting for him. He felt repulsed from the sight of these insects, which he'd never seen on Earth and were bigger than humans. They were all level 3 or 4. He also saw some elites. Kahaik, Kik, Kihik. He'd never absorbed their bones before, so he wasn't sure, but it seems like they were uneasy. They weren't even humans they could eat, but bones, so they must have been uneasy that nothing good came. The moment when those picky eaters gathered in the middle passageway, he burrowed the lightning tooth in the middle of their group. It pierced through a few gigantic insects and burrowed deep into the ground. Intense sparks were discharged from it, paralyzing all of the bugs in the area. Lightning and acid, they both have their advantages. Shin Woo thought and willed the lightning tooth. At that moment, without giving the bugs a chance to recover and move, the lightning tooth exploded fiercely. Critical hit. The rule of bone skill has become LV5. All stats have increased by 3. The lightning cloud engulfed the passage. Various parts of the passageway collapsed and emitted an awful sound. Fortunately, the ceiling didn't collapse. Since so many bugs screamed at once, it sounded like dozens of blackboards being scratched at once. Charge. Just keep the right side open. Following your command. Assault mode. Shin Woo commanded the golems to charge, summoned the Drake Horn Lance, and gripped it. He targeted the insects that were still intact and running out of the explosion, and charged with a force that would rip them to shreds. What about your mana? I'm fine. The weighty, cone-shaped lance discharged dark blue sparks. The entire weapon was clad in a fierce lightning. He couldn't do anything about the weapon's element, but Shin Woo was already able to comfortably wield the lightning element, so doing this much was extremely easy for him. The weapon tinged with lightning established an even greater harmony with bursting thunder, and was naturally able to release more destructive power. This was what it meant to wield the power of an element with one's own effort. Preparing for collision. Switching to thorn gloves. Destroying all enemies. In front. Around the time Shin Woo had finished his preparations to attack, the 3 golems simultaneously dashed into the front. Regardless of what lay before them, they pushed through it and lived up to their name. As level 5 golems which were more powerful and tougher than other level 5s, none of the bugs could pierce through them. Kihik. Shock. The insects, which were running around flusteredly due to the explosion, weren't able to avoid the golems properly. Because of that, the bugs escaped to the right corner, the only location which the golems couldn't cover. But naturally, Shin Woo rushed over there. He used the iron golems, which were akin to an impregnable fortress, in order to lead the bugs into one place. Kushak. Gororu. Gororu. Huwip. Compared to when he had pierced through an iron golem in a single blow, this group of bugs was nothing. Shin Woo grabbed the Drake Horn Lance, which was roughly discharging electricity, with both hands and thrust forward, speeding forward with Jin. It was lightning that ran atop the earth, ground lightning. Critical hit. The primarily discharged sparks made it so that the bugs couldn't move very well, and the following lance thrust brutally tore through their bodies. The blue sparks that came from the cone-shaped lance's cutting edge made them look like a falling star. Then, they followed behind the golems and pushed through the passageway. The passageway was filled with the sound of screams, sparks, and reeked of a nutty smell. He'd never been so relieved that he could stomach this. 1. We have destroyed all of the enemies in the area. Releasing thorn gloves. The golems said mechanically, and right after they stopped, Shin Woo and Jin stopped as well. He thought there might be more, so he turned around, but all he saw were the bugs' corpses. Why did you throw your weapon at the beginning if you were just going to go through them? I wanted to provoke all the guys on the ceiling. There's no reason to do the same thing twice, right? But after saying that, Shin Woo clicked his tongue. I guess we do have to do the same thing twice. Golems, collect all of the bones and parry him. I understand. Following command. You. Seeing Shin Woo treat the golems like slaves, Jin's goblin fire narrowed. However, Shin Woo actually muttered something even more brazen. Should I bring along a few golems, even though they're a bit slow? There were insects hidden within the remaining passageway as well, but Shin Woo and the golems thoroughly trampled them. Even if pest exterminators went at it, Shin Woo was sure that they wouldn't do a more perfect job than them, and Shin Woo ultimately ended up arriving at his destination. It was a vineyard. From the start, he hadn't expected the vineyard to be intact. Regardless of how prosperous the underground empire had been, living vegetation couldn't be expected to last when neglected for so many years. It was different from ripening and storing alcohol. There's no way the vineyard could have been maintained. There was a time I thought so as well. It's still growing though, isn't it? That's right. The field, so vast that it felt unmeasurable, was filled with grapevines that emitted a fresh vigor, and large grapes hung upon each vine. Shin Woo, who didn't know much about the development of plant life, just knew that this wasn't normal. Shin Woo, look. The fields goes on, yet there isn't a single dead vine. Does this mean the underground empire possesses the greatest magic on the planet? Huh. But while marveling at the vineyard, Shin Woo discovered an unusual trace. Contrary to the vineyard, there was no sign of magic involved, but there were traces of the ground being unearthed just a short while ago. That wasn't all. There were traces of the nearby grapevine's unnecessary branches being cut off, as well as signs that grapes were harvested from the other grapevines. Shin Woo? It couldn't be an undead. Of course, that didn't mean an undead couldn't come into a dungeon. Since there was an instance of him killing a hero that had turned undead and gone into the dungeon. But if that's the case, there should be traces of the death energy that they emitted, but he didn't see it at all. That meant there was only one possible answer. There was a living being managing this field. Yeah, now that I think about it, there was a bulkhead protecting this field from the undead insects. Even though the insects had become undead, they had a tendency to instinctively seek out fruit and move according to that instinct. They were only gathered in the underground passage, and the fact that they couldn't enter the orchard meant that someone was protecting the vineyard. Golems, stealth mode, concealing magic and standing by below ground level. Shin Woo said one line, and the 3 golems instantaneously burrowed into the ground and crawled in. In the blink of an eye, the golems concealed themselves. Seeing that, Jin just blinked his eyes and Shin Woo called for him. Jin, why are you calling me so seriously again? You can cover yourself up with that magic armor, right? Magic armor. Ah, steel heart? Yeah, probably. Then use it right now. Use it so that you don't look like an undead. Why do you want me to? Never mind, I got it. Jin knew that there was no way Shin Woo's intuition was wrong, and wordlessly covered his body with steel, making it so that no one would be able to tell he was a skeleton from the outside. Confirming that, Shin Woo activated the Joker's innate skill, disguise. Using the disguise skill, you are disguised as someone you are completely familiar with. He had originally planned to primarily train this skill after parting ways with Kraisha, but now that it's come to this, there was no helping it. Immediately after acquiring the disguise skill, he had thought about this. He'd already dispelled the misunderstanding between him, Kraisha, and Yi Jin and become friendly with them, but it wouldn't be this easy from now on, so he decided to act like he was human through the disguise skill. How did you? It only changes my exterior appearance. Calm down. Jin looked at him in shock, but Shin Woo just calmly replied and examined his body. His arm, which had been composed of black bones, was covered in skin. That's right. He was currently disguised as a human being. It was his first time using the skill, so even he himself was a bit surprised. It was truly a perfect disguise from the outside. Hey, how are you so calm right now? Here. Shin Woo placed his human-looking hand atop Jin's head, who was agitated and about to scream. At that moment, Jin really calmed down. Though it had the exact same feel of a human hand, it was extremely cold. Are you the exact same on the inside? Yeah. Of course, if I were to use fire, I could mimic human temperature, but in the end, it's still a disguise. I see. Shin Woo replied bitterly, and Jin replied in an almost dreary voice and drooped. Shin Woo could understand him. Since Jin saw a chance of turning back into a human from his undead state in Shin Woo's disguise skill. As he thought, he should have told Jin about the skill before using it. Shin Woo slightly regretted it. Especially because the skill is so imperfect right now. I'd originally wanted to disguise myself as an extremely ordinary human being. Originally, the disguise skill possessed some really troublesome conditions. Since he could only mimic the appearance of someone who he was completely familiar with and remembered. Right now, he could only disguise himself as a few types of skeletons, a golem, and his own appearance when he was alive on Earth. Amongst them, the only one that looked like a hero was his human appearance. But when you were still on Earth, was your face. Shin Woo, they're coming. Yeah. Shin Woo never knew when the person managing this field would arrive, so he had disguised himself beforehand just in case. However, Jin, whose 5 senses and agility had grown, confirmed that there was a living being coming. At that moment, Shin Woo stopped thinking about anything else and started to act as if he were just a normal human hero. You there, stay where you are. Around the time he heard Jin and braced himself, he heard a voice carried by the wind from afar. Shin Woo realized that this was a high-level wind technique. They would actually be far away, but the technique allowed them to speak as if they were close by. Calm down. They haven't figured out who we are yet. I'm glad we're not too late. Sorry, but you have to start acting like a horse from now on. Shin Woo used his assimilation skill to inaudibly converse with Jin, and told him to calm down physically and mentally. Then, the voice continued speaking. It was a refreshing and clean girl's voice. Who are you? Are you human? A hero? It's nice to meet you, senior. My name is Shin Woo. Ah, Shin Woo. As soon as Shin Woo disclosed his name, the woman's voice became noticeably relieved. Shin Woo suddenly realized that it was a voice he'd often heard in the chatting channel, Aryan Rupart's voice. He thought someone other than a hero was managing the field, but this made things easy. That was one less unnecessary variable. It was a relief that he was able to learn and use his disguise skill before it was too late. He'd like to avoid saying, "Stop, friendly fire," like he had against Kraisha from now on, It's nice to meet you, Senior. Repartee? In many ways, Shin Woo felt relaxed and turned around to greet her as calmly as possible. At least, he wanted to, but when he saw her, he ended up stuttering. You're as handsome as Jin said. Ah, is it your first time seeing an elf? Yes. There weren't any elves in my world. Shin Woo replied powerlessly, and she lowered her bow that had been aimed at him, smiling sweetly. She was garbed in simple colored clothing, but that simplicity seemed to accentuate her beauty. She was dozens of kilometers away from them, but Shin Woo could see her with just one glance. Seeing her longish rising ears, Shin Woo couldn't hide his astonishment. She was really an elf that he'd only seen in comics before. I'll go to you. I understand. Though Shin Woo looked like a human, he felt fundamentally different. From the start, she felt like a heavenly beauty that couldn't be reached by a human. If Shin Woo were a normal man, he would have been surprised by her beauty and either faint or go crazy over her. However, his heart was calm like a beach without even a single gust of wind. On the contrary, Jin was surprised. She's really pretty. Jin, you really are a man. Hey, wait. I didn't make fun of you this time. Hey. Jin shook his back up and down for no reason, and Shin Woo protested Jin's bullying. Aryan Repartee suddenly leapt towards them here and there and approached them. He perceived elves as being extremely nimble, but it seemed like that was actually true. Considering her short-term speed, it seemed as though she could even compete with Jin. It seemed like her staying power wasn't bad either, as she quickly arrived in front of them. Hiat. You've come so far, Mr. Shin Woo, so you must come from a world that's developed magic, but it must be quite a peculiar world to not have elves in it. It's nice to meet you. My name is Aryan Repartee. As I've said, my name is Shin Woo. This guy's a horse. I was lucky enough to get here. He. Jin was trying his best. Fortunately, Aryan Repartee didn't notice that Jin was strange. It's a miracle that you found a living horse in a dungeon, but you also trained it? Aha! You must have been a knight, Shin Woo. Right? It's quite embarrassing, but yes, in my original world I was a knight. Shin Woo naturally lied and started to wonder whether he needed to learn more about how to act like a knight. No, that wasn't important right now. As I thought, you were managing this field, Senior? Of course. It'd be difficult to create a field so teeming with life, but not for an elf. A peculiar facet of elves was that they were extremely prideful. Shin Woo decided to keep this in mind. Aryan Repartee spoke with a friendly smile to the nodding Shin Woo. Take as much as you want. I'm planning on leaving this area soon. Ah, thank you. I knew you were in a danger level 2 zone, but I didn't think we'd meet like this. Jin is always talking about you, so it feels like I already know you. Shin Woo, I had a lot I wanted to tell you if we met. Of course. I'd like to hear what Jin said about me as well, Senior. You can call me Aryan. Shin Woo harvested the grapes with Aryan's help, and they started to speak about various matters. She planned to leave here and join up with Lloyd HK, and Shin Woo told her about how he got here. It was obviously a lie, and about other corresponding matters. Shin Woo subtracted roughly 80% of his achievements until now and relayed the remaining 20% to her, but even that 20% put Aryan in a state of unceasing admiration. Just by telling her about how he defeated a few elites a higher level than him caused her eyes to shine. What amazing courage! I already heard about it from Jin, but I didn't think you'd be that good. Aren't you afraid of death? I wonder. That fear makes me want to challenge myself even more. If I'm not a bit courageous now, I feel like I'll face off against an unstoppable foe later on. Splendid. I'll remember that. From the very beginning, Aryan's perception of Shin Woo was pretty much the highest it could be. He could understand why, but whenever he said something, her response would contain Jin in it. Have you contacted Jin? Jin would be happy if she knew that. Jin is always. Before long, Shin Woo realized that Aryan had completely mistaken his relationship with Jin. And that misunderstanding was probably for good reason. After all, there's no smoke without a fire. He clutched his aching head and replied as calmly as possible. I did private chat with her before, but... I see. Thank you very much. She's kind, but the one who caused that once weak girl to diligently work hard is you, Shin Woo. Ha, ha ha. Shin Woo's inventory was soon completely full, and he then acted as though he was putting the rest of them into his own inventory while he was actually putting them in Jin's inventory. It was possible because he was using his assimilation skill to its maximum potential. He couldn't reveal that he was a skeleton and he was packing them because he had no other choice, but it did feel truly pointless. Krasia was the only one doing something important. Who? It felt regrettable just leaving this field, but it's a relief that you're here. Thank you again. I'm the one who should be thanking you. Since I grew the fruit to be eaten. Around the time the vineyard was completely cleared out, Shin Woo figured out that while Arian was aware of the vineyard, she was completely unaware of the winery. As expected, she only took the route to the vineyard. Furthermore, he figured out that Arian seemed to like Lloyd, but hated the prince. However, that wasn't really important information. To be honest, the moment I saw you, I wanted to entrust this orchard to you, but... Ah, senior. That would be a pain in the ass. Krasia might want it, but Shin Woo didn't need grapes. However, when Shin Woo thought about how to refuse, Arian said something that caused him to prick his non-existent ears. However, that's impossible. Honestly, I wanted to tell you this from the very beginning. A large force of undead is coming this way. We have to leave this area before we encounter them,